Welcome back, everybody. I'm so excited here for maybe the smartest podcast we do here on RHAP. We are so blessed to have back with us one of my great friends, and of course, a survivor legend and a font of knowledge. Please welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Christian Hubicki. Christian, how are you?
Doing great, Rob. Thanks for the intro. It's lovely as always. Happy New Year to you. First time
Happy
seeing
New
you this
Year.
New Year.
Yes.
Yes, very exciting. And we're now in between Survivor seasons, and I think it's a great time to just talk about whatever people want to hear about.
Yeah. So this is actually the fifth Ask Dr. Christian Hubicki. The first one I think was right in the fall of 2020. And we have Christian has very generously come back and thrown down the gauntlet of any questions that the listeners have about science. What do we say? Science, Survivor, and sandwiches, basically, and everything in between.
Correct.
And we got a lot of great questions from the audience, and this is I think a great time to talk some science and beyond here with Dr. Hubicki. So Christian, what's been new with you?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, last year was busy year for me. I mean, things have been fine, and busy in a great way. My lab has been busy. We've been expanding our research. We have robots that walk. We got robots that fly. We've made some algorithms of robots that walk and roll. That's really the name of the paper, walk and roll. That would be a nice play on words. Even robots, start work with robots that cook now as a new fun thing. And
what do they make?
Yeah. Well, right now, nothing. But soon, the idea is that one of the ideas is to have them make a pizza. And that, robots aren't so great at being able to kind of squish around soft things very well. So could you get them to roll pizza dough? It's just an example of what you could try to cook. And we got a brand new robot that is a full humanoid robot, taller than me, with arms, walking around. It's busy. I gave a TEDx talk last year. That was a big thing. That was fun. And that was half robotics, half survivor. It's always what I hoped a TEDx talk would be if I ever got to give one. It's just been generally busy. So and I'm just trying to keep up with stuff. Oh, and also there was robotics news that I had to comment that I felt need to comment on. Elon Musk made a robot, and so I foolishly took to Twitter to talk about it, and I got to talk about it on some news outlets. So it was a crazy year. So
yeah. Well, can you give us a little bit more backstory about this?
Yeah. So I know that. So Tesla. People know the company, the electric car company. They're making a foray into robotics, and their enigmatic founder decided to make a humanoid robot in like 0 time flat, and they managed to put a robot together in a very short period of time. That for how quickly it was put together, it kind of walked around. So in a way that's really impressive for me as a roboticist. And I was like sort of commenting because my specific subject matter expertise is robots that walk. So I said, okay, here's what the robot's doing. This is what we can tell just by looking at it, what algorithms it's using and how they describe. And this is where it is compared to state of the art. And I think a lot of people, hopefully, I hope people learned a lot from that. And so I got to talk about that on a couple news stations. That was fun. So news stations, if you want to hear about robots, slide DMs.
Christian, that's great. I don't want to really, go toot my own horn, but this week I was contacted to do some news appearances about MILF Manor. So, we're both, professionals at the top of our field.
I taught my, doff my cap to you, sir. And I game respects game, as I always say. So absolutely. So big year. So
two experts. Just talking shop. Yep.
Well, thank you for letting me brag for like 60 seconds, Rob. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so glad to have you back. And this to me feels like a very newsy especially like in the science realm, where I feel like that in the last couple of months, I feel like there's been like some major headlines and seemingly like new discoveries of things that are going on. And it feels like that this was a great time to, have you stop by and answer some questions.
Yeah, there's been a lot of sciencey stuff breaking in in not too distant past. So I was really thrilled to see some of the questions that popped in, and yeah, I'm look forward to getting to them with you.
Okay. Well, why don't we start with something that I think was the most requested thing? And the last time we did this, I think it was Wordle was where we started. So that's just how far science has advanced in the last couple of months. So we got a question from a great friend of the podcast, Alec Hester, said, "Hey Christian, what are your thoughts on Chat GPT? Is it an actual breakthrough in AI, and does it say anything to you about where AI is headed?" And the last time that we spoke, I think that we had been talking about Dolly Mini,
Yep.
which was creating some images that were like
Mhm.
very like rudimentary. And I feel like, so I don't know when that was. Maybe was that at the end of the last Survivor season? And
Yeah.
I feel like that all of this like artificial intelligence, AI, different in every like different facet of creativity has really seemed to like have only grown by leaps and bounds since then.
It really feels that way, and I understand what people are sensing. And for those who aren't familiar with Chat GPT, it's been a really a buzz and a meme all over the internet. I couldn't miss it. But the idea is it's a chat bot, and and so you give it a prompt. It just basically has a nice little open text window. You chat to it, and then it responds. And people have, generally speaking, been really impressed by what it can do. And Rob, have you played with Chat
So
GPT at
much,
all?
so
Okay.
much. I
Okay.
love. I'm always amused and tickled by what ChatGPT spits out.
Mhm. So,
I
so, so do you have any favorite stories of what you've put into Chat GPT, or is it just all a blur and I should just sort of like jump in?
Well, we've done a lot of stuff just like playing around with it on the podcast.
Yeah.
That's something that I have done. A couple people I know also are big on, like, it's great for, hey, tell a bedtime story to my kid.
Mhm.
Of like, okay, Dominic and Anthony are 9 and 7, and like they are doing like they lost their dog, and then they go into the world of Minecraft, write a bedtime story about this, and it spits it out.
Yeah. And so I'm happy to talk about this because like there's a lot of excitement about it. I want to put it in context with what this means in terms of where AI is going. And to be fair, there's a lot of people speculating wildly in the space. And you have to be careful when there's such a hype around a new thing that comes out. Now, deservedly, people are talking about this. Um, my high level take is that one are a few things. Number one, when I was learning machine learning as a wee baby grad student, if I did something like that did like this, I'd be jumping over the moon. It's way past when I was learning about support vector machines and clustering and k-means clustering and all these older methods that are still relevant, but not this stuff. So it's really impressive from a technical standpoint what they're able to do with this neural network that they've trained. And we'll get into a little of the details of that. So I want to say it's very impressive. Um, I've seen a lot of really hyperbolic takes about what this means. Like I've seen people talk, the typical talk of like, oh, humanity is going to be taken over by HAP GPT. Oh, it's this genius who can answer all of our questions for us. And I start by saying that it's clearly not a very reliable answer of questions. Sometimes it says some things, it gives you answers that are correct or eerily smart, and not even just text answers. You can ask it to write code for you in all kinds of languages. I went through my own experience, Rob, when I heard when I decided to dive into the new Chat GPT. I actually wrote a whole blog post about it in my blog that no one has a link to. So so about my experiences.
Your
Yeah.
diary?
I guess technically it's a diary if no one has a link to it. That's true. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe people can find it, or maybe I'll link to it if the people are curious. But about what my experience, because I want to go in as a user, and I was initially very impressed. And because one of the things that we were particularly talking about here in the professor circles at my university is like, how easily can this be used to cheat? How or
Yeah.
just give you answers to questions. And I sort of looked at it from like a high school level. Like if I had to write an essay like about the Scarlet Letter. So I actually asked it, like, write a 3-paragraph essay about the Scarlet Letter. And it spits out a 3-paragraph essay about the Scarlet Letter, and it'd be one that would give at least a passing grade, or a decent grade, It's like, and I was like, oh wow, that's impressive. And then I started asking it harder things. I asked it to write code that I would ask my students to write as an exercise. Like one thing I'll ask them to do is to write a computer simulation of a swinging pendulum. And I asked it to do that, and it did it, and it got it right. And I'm like, oh wow, this is pretty good. And then I kept asking it harder and harder questions, like graduate research level questions. I'm like, what, it's not doing bad. And then I was like, I went for the moon. I was like, asked it something I've always wanted to do but never had time to do, and it gave me code, and I was like, oh my god. So I went and I copied the code. I went and put it into my little code thing, and I ran it, and it was like, error. I'm like, dang it. I thought I was so on board, and it didn't work, and I was like, okay, maybe we can fix this, because you can ask ChatGPT to try to fix things, right?
Code. Yeah.
Fix the code, and it tried, and it didn't. And I realized that, oh no, it didn't understand. Like, I realized when I looked deeper at it, it didn't really understand what it was doing. It kind of was sort of piecing together things that kind of made sense. Once I started to get into things that I really understood, I started to like see the seams, and that it has a hard time. It's a hard time being very principled in how it logically constructs a sequence. Now, it does have ways of saying this thing should come before this thing. This makes sense. Okay. But it doesn't have a way, it doesn't really do a good job of looking back at what it's generated and saying, did that make any sense? In a way, I'm going to use this word, it's a bullshitter. It's an amazing bullshit algorithm. And so, which can work fine when you're just coming up with a story on the fly, right? You're coming up with you want to write the Canterbury Tales in the style of Kesha. It can sort of just kind of mash those things together, right? I don't like you can do that. But the issue when it comes to the AI that we have to be aware of is that if we're going to rely upon it for things, it needs to be reliable, because there's a lot of talk about ChatGPT being a replacement for Google. Okay,
Yeah.
that's you've heard things about this, Rob. Like, people are like, hey, just treat it like Google.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about this, about how is ChatGPT going to be the Google killer, where ChatGPT has is connected with Microsoft, and so that there's some talk about maybe Bing actually surpassing Google, because that they might be able to add some sort of like ChatGPT functionality to Bing, which might be better at answering your questions than Google.
That's the idea. That's the fear. And apparently there's a New York Times article about high-level Google executives basically hitting the panic button
Right.
in their companies, that we got to change how we're doing things, because Google, they themselves have things like ChatGPT. And this is where we'll start digging into a little bit of the details and start, in my opinion, let's break into a bit of the reality of what's going on with ChatGPT. ChatGPT is what we call an LLM, or a large language model. Okay, like the idea is that it's a large model, meaning that behind the scenes there is a network of neurons that's really huge. That basically, imagine like little circles that are neurons, kind of like in your brain, connected all by little wires, theoretical wires that are that are connecting them. And that network is massive. Okay, and ChatGPT is a particular type. It's called the GPT stands for generative pre-trained transformer. Okay, what does that mean? Basically, it's pre-trained. that means that off on some huge computer cluster somewhere, they have given an algorithm a bunch of data to tune up this series of neurons. Okay, so all those little wires connecting all those neurons, you can imagine them being really thick and big, meaning that they're really important connections, or really thin and wispy, which means they're not important connections. And we've gotten in the last 10 years amazingly good at finding ways to tune up how big and small those wires can be, which make all these different connections, from between like millions of different neurons and like even many more possible connections. Okay, so it's pre-trained. So means what you're getting is not necessarily learning from what you tell it. It is, processing what it's given, but it's not like updating its notion of reality. I shouldn't even say reality. It's updating its process based upon what you're doing. Okay, it's just taking in stuff. It's already been trained, right? The transformer is, it has very little to do with Michael Bay. And it is the style of network. There are many different architectures of networks, and like it's like a whole zoo of them. And that it's a particular combination of different pieces. If you go and look at any deep learning neural network paper nowadays, you'll see phrases like autoencoder or batch normalization, or these are all, or perceptrons, or recurrent neural nets, RNNs. These are all kind of buzzwords that mean different like connections between these little neurons. Where do the wires go? How many wires do you have? Where do they point? Okay. And these people who make these algorithms are very clever about putting in little math equations into those little neurons that give it generally the behavior they want it to have. Like, here's a very basic one, right? The way a neuron works in our brains, that if you fire a little electricity into it, a little bit, that neuron doesn't do very much until you put in enough electricity, it crosses some threshold, and then it fires, and then it sends out signals to all the neurons around it. Okay, and if enough of those fire, they will fire. And you can see this in like brain scans. You can see all the neurons firing into the back, right? So they basically turn that behavior into a math equation. So if you ever seen a graph of different math equations, some of them look like they're flat, then all of a sudden they spike up. Okay, like there's one called a hyperbolic tangent that looks like that. They're like, oh, that looks kind of like what happens when a neuron works. Let's put that in there. Okay, and they do that stuff like all the time. So that's what's in like a neural network, and they train that up. And the transformer is a particular type, and what it's particularly good at is that it's able to pay attention to stuff that you said maybe a while ago, or when it's writing a long paragraph, it doesn't forget what it wrote in the first part of the sentence. So it can make that all relate up. It's relate back and forth. And it's able to pay attention to things that are far earlier on in the text that it generated. That's what transformers are good at. And it's one of the reasons that ChatGPT is able to write whole essays. And that's why one of the ways it comes across is so impressive. Is this making sense so far, Rob? I appreciate you following.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for. So basically, I just want to give people a little depth as to what's going on inside and why it's seeming more impressive. The other thing is that they're just throwing more and more data at this thing. They're taking data from the internet of things people have already written and are using the training process to have ChatGPT have a better and better way of relating the way that one word relates to another. Okay. And so it has a special way of applying attention between different tokens. And it's all a little technical. But basically, they put on the more data you put in, the more training you put in theory, it can get better at producing results that seem like they make sense. And by seem like they make sense, meaning they are similar to other results that they've seen. Not making sense in terms of they correspond to physical reality. Because ChatGPT does not understand that does not truly understand in a physical way that I am sitting on a chair, that I'm in front of a podcast microphone talking to Rob Cesternino. It doesn't understand reality in that way. it's relating types of words to other words, which in a way, it's a very powerful way to view the world and allows it to both connect, to write Kesha Canterbury Tales and also write my coding homework, right?
Did you do that? That's the second time you mentioned that.
I thought it was a clever idea. I should put it in there, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I put in a couple other ideas, but like it was impressive, right? What it's able to, but because it doesn't have a fundamental understanding of reality, it doesn't have a way of testing why it's true. And this is where you start to see some of like the really bad answers that ChatGPT will come up to basic questions. And people have posted these all over the internet, which, yes, it's imperfect, but I think it's more deep than just, oh, sometimes it screws up. I think that if my skepticism about it being a Google killer is that it's not very good at checking what it's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what that and so when it comes to people trying to write scientific papers with this thing, I wouldn't trust a paper that's written out of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
How reliable is it? So
Yeah.
that's my state of the current thing. So like maybe it'll fix it. Maybe ChatGPT next version, which is called GPT-4,
Yeah.
maybe it'll fix it. But the way that what they're basically doing is they're taking the same style of network, the same architecture, making it bigger, putting in more data. Will that fix it? I am a little skeptical, but no one actually knows.
Mm-hmm. So I think I'm a little bit more bullish on it being a Google killer, or at least Google develops its own product that has this same sort of functionality, because that based on my like limited understanding of how the Google search works, and as somebody who has a website, my latest like SEO practices might be a little dated, but when you type stuff into Google and you search, you are basically getting like what Google thinks, like in terms of like your keyword hits and page rank of bringing you to a page that, some author has optimized to best be for that search, but it might not be exactly the type of thing that you're looking for, or might not provide you with the answer to what you're looking for. Whereas at least I feel like something like a chat GPT is sort of like processing a bunch of stuff, but or maybe at least piecing together a bunch of stuff that might end up giving you an answer that is more in line with what you're looking for.
Yeah, I understand the bullishness. I would not begrudge someone from being bullish. When I'm reading some of the takes on ChatGPT from people who are like just for I should fully disclose, I'm not an expert in modern neural network architectures and machine learning. When I teach machine learning and neural nets, I teach it from a pretty basic level. So I'm not innovating at the top end of the sphere. So I try to listen to people who are closer to the end of this, who have interesting things to say. Gary Marcus is a professor that he's a professor currently, is a voice that I listen to on this. I read his Substack talking about this sort of thing. I mean, the question is the information that ChatGPT generates more reliable than Google? And I think that is highly questionable.
Yeah.
I mean, at least Google, when it's delivering you a page, it is a page that theoretically was written by someone, maybe it grabs a page from a non-expert, although I think its algorithm is pretty good about finding pages for reference on like medical topics, for instance, that might be more reliable, right? It does, like, it's not taking information from 4 or 5 different pages and try to synthesize it into this is how you cure your cold. Which that process of synthesizing the information together, it's impressive that ChatGPT can do it. But if it's gonna do that, all of a sudden the burden of how accurate you have to be suddenly matters a lot more than Google pointing you to a page, which then you go to that page, who wrote that page. Theoretically, you can go to say, or you can say, oh, this is, I don't know, WebMD. I don't know. Do I trust WebMD? I don't know. Or no, this is a noted expert neurologist in the field. This is what they say to do in this situation. You can evaluate the source. Whereas everything that comes out of ChatGPT is interesting, but it sort of smuggles in a lot of information and sort of blends it all together. So you don't know what is contributing to it. and you don't know whether or not the results are reliable.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess in some ways, like it's not that different from like Dolly Mini, where from afar, a lot of these images look like really good, and then when you sort of like zoom in and like, oh my god, this is a nightmare.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be too down. I mean, but I think the picture that I get, that like it's easy to be blown away. One, it's very entertaining, right?
Hmm.
It's to do it. It's sort of impressive just to take in. But when I was playing around with it, there was a point where I spent like a whole like Saturday just like trying to take it in, just get a sense of this whole thing. And there was a point when it was giving me good code. I was like, should I tell my whole lab they should really start using this to help be a coding co-pilot? There's actually a feature in some coding tools where you have a co-pilot, which you say, oh, there's this boring piece of code I don't want to write. Go write this for me. Okay.
Hmm.
I was thinking like, oh, maybe my lab should use this now. But then when I messed with it more, I was like, the information synthesizing together, it's just not reliable. I wouldn't count on it if my reputation was on the line for this code to work, unless I could really check that it was working. So, so because it's synthesizing that information together, and at first it's like, wow, it was glorious. But when you take a deeper look, it often isn't. As impressive as it technically is, it still makes really boneheaded mistakes. It will just flat out tell you. It told me, like, I started asking it questions about my class. Say, hey, could it basically help a student pass my class? And it basically told me that -1 was a positive number at one point. I was like, okay, all right, this is not a reliable thing. And so I ended up sort of trying to synthesize. I came up with strategies that I want to tell teachers that they could use to like write their questions in a way that ChatGPT might have a hard time, for instance. And so as a result of this experience, and that was, but it was a whole journey. And so I'm still skeptical as to how useful this is as like a massive tool to use. But I just don't know. No one knows if making this bigger is going to change like the fundamental way we operate in the world. No one knows.
Yeah. I saw an article this week that a person had speculated that 90% of online content will be written by AI. Do you feel like that is where we're headed, or be created by AI, which I'm assuming eventually means like video and maybe even podcasts?
Mm. Well, it depends what 90% means. Is 90% of if 90% of it's basically spam. I mean, one
Hmm.
thing that ChatGPT, again, is good at BSing situations. Where is BS really useful? Well, maybe if you're trying to like just pass off like some kind of scam product to somebody, right? It's like, hey, ChatGPT, write how my miracle Reuben oil is going to cure all your diseases, and
Yeah.
it would come up with something. It probably would sound half decent, and if you're not thinking critically, you might take it in. That would be basically spam. I could SEO, search optimize that spam, put it at the top of page rank, or try to do that for Reuben oil, and I can see that being being used in that way, like right now. Okay, so but in terms of percentage of content might not be the metric you'd be looking for. You'd be like, what is the percentage of information upon which people act would be or is actually accessed by people because not filtered out by whatever search engine as spam is being generated by AI. That's an open question, obviously, to me.
Okay. Anything else about the chat GPT, all of the different artificial intelligence tools that are out there that you want to talk about while we're here?
Well, yeah. So I mean, we'll wrap it up, but I understand why it's very exciting. I think that the most important thing I would tell anyone who's like trying to talk to a chat GPT, do not mistake what it's telling you as wisdom. Okay. Do never do that. Okay. Because you do not know what it is blending together to give you that answer. Okay. Sometimes what it says can seem profound. But a lot of that time, sometimes it's a little bit of a Rorschach test. You got to be aware that we can read into things a lot. Can it give you right answers sometimes? Yes. Sometimes it can give you working code. Yes. Even in those cases, though, don't make the mistake of thinking it's wise.
Okay. Very interesting stuff. Yeah. I was, not the answer I was expecting you to have about ChatGPT.
Well, I mean, and I should like reveal like my, well, not reveal, but I mean, I am a techie guy, I guess, because I work in robotics.
I'd say so.
I say so, but like at the same time, you know, as I'm also a researcher in related fields, I'm not in a top level AI research. I work in robotics, it's a little different, but it's our job to be a little skeptical and to sort of tamp down hype before it gets too, but when it doesn't, when it, when we don't really know what it's going to do. I think a lot of people are excited about the possibility. And I think that that is reasonable. I think that also we have to remember that OpenAI is a company, okay? And they are, and even though they started off partly as a nonprofit, they are also now kind of also sort of for profit. I don't fully understand exactly how it is doing both, but I'm sure there's a reason. And it might be shopping to Microsoft. So there's a marketing angle to what they're trying to do. So I remember there was a time recently, like every dang day, I would open up a social media profile. It would be like trending topics, the next GPT-4, and I'd see the same like spanned out like image of like, this is what GPT had as data, and it would show this little tiny dot. This is what GPT-4, the new one, has, and it's this big blob. It's like, just imagine how big and awesome it's going to be. I was like, it sounded a bit like marketing.
Mhm.
So, and so while there are real applications to this now, and I think it's not necessarily just getting people to cheat on their homework. Okay.
Mhm.
But I think it'd be potentially be useful as a coding copilot. I think hopefully at some point, but you have to also sort of tamp down what we know right now, just because it seems promising. There are so many things in our world that seem promising right now that we just don't know if they'll happen. Sometimes they don't happen. So we got to remember that.
Did you happen to see that one of our listeners ended up asking ChatGPT for questions for you?
Yeah, it did a pretty good job, if I recall. Like they were like, I remember seeing them. It was one of the. I don't have it up in front of me. Do you have it on you, or I can remember
Give me
vague
a second,
questions.
and I can
Yeah,
go
you
ahead
got it.
and pull up the Twitter thread.
Yeah, sure. But I'll tell you, it was fun just playing with ChatGPT. While you're pulling that up, any note to this might be a trick for teachers. One thing
Mhm.
I noticed that it's not very good at is if you give an artificial constraint to like ChatGPT response. Like if you told students, write an essay that's exactly 97 words, it is very bad at counting the number of words that it wrote, for instance. And that's, I think, partly the structure of how ChatGPT works and how it like takes a word and then it generates a word, and then it sort of takes that word and then sends it back into its decoder again, and it generates another word, and it doesn't necessarily know when to stop, and it'll eventually stop. It hits the little stop state inside of itself. Like one
Mhm.
time I told it like summarize Scarlet Letter in 10 words, and it gave me a paragraph, and
Mhm.
I said, can you try again? And it sort of eventually got me down to 12. And I think that is, and there's a kind of a mathematical, and this I could be out over my skis on this one. I think there's a mathematical reason why it has a tough time with those kinds of things. So there's a trick for you if you're for your writing prompts for students.
So, one of our listeners, and his name is at Bronder, asked
Mhm.
ChatGPT, "Do you know who Christian Hubicki is?" And it gave your bio and said he's doing a podcast with Rob Cesternino. Can you come up with some questions to ask him for the podcast, including one silly or challenging question? I'm not sure which one was the silly or challenging question,
Sure.
but
Okay.
there was a couple of decent ones.
Yeah.
Um, okay. One of the 11 questions is, what is the worst lie you ever told on Survivor?
Oh, that's the worst lie. At one point, Mike White and I were meeting in the middle of the night.
Mhm.
Like that's the only time that was our secret meeting time because I don't think he wanted to be associated with me publicly, I guess, but in terms for strategic reasons. And he asked me point blank if I had the idol, and it was the middle of the night, so I lied horribly, and I said no. At that point, I did, and I was like, oh, and I went back to bed. I was like, I screwed that up. So I went and got up Mike again. It's like, Mike, I'm sorry I lied to you. It's like, yeah, that was pretty embarrassing how badly you lied to me. So I was like, I remember that. I was like, that was like, okay. I mean, cat was out of the bag at that point, but
Yeah. One of the other questions is, if you were stranded on a deserted island and can only have 3 survivor castaways with you, who would they be and why? I don't know if ChatGPT really understands what survivor is.
it's interestingly meta. It just kind of just took a typical question. You was like, if you be stranded on a desert island with blank, and then just put it together, you can kind of see how it worked behind the scenes for that. I mean, one of them is always Tony because he's fun. Like I like he'd be a fun one. He's someone that's good at sort of the surviving element. I mean, Boston Rob basically owns real estate in Fiji at this point, right? You know, he's like, you know, he has that shack on the island of the idols, right? Still, that's his land.
Yeah.
So you know, I'd want to have the owner there, so I wouldn't get kicked off his land. So Rob, I think that would be good. And I honestly, I was trying to think, like, I think it'd be fun to talk with Sophie, and someone to talk to about stuff. I think Sophie would be fun. Those are just people not from my season. Obviously, if I want friends, I want people from like my own season, of course. But from any season, just to humor the artificially intelligent kind of ChatGPT.
I believe one time Boston Rob and Sophie were stranded on an island together, and famously, it was not a fun time.
Oh, so I forget that. What was the relation? Is this Winners at War? Was there a relationship?
Winners at War. That was Boston Rob's final survivor act to this point, where he tried to do the buddy system on steroids.
Oh, I remember Adam was I taught him being there with Adam. I forgot Sophie was there too. Maybe he and Sophie,
Sarah and Ben. Yeah.
This is more like, maybe if I had access to these people, maybe that I'm not considering the group dynamic. That's my flaw here. I'm not sure. So yeah.
Let's bring in a question from Bill Sorensen, who said, is that nuclear fusion a breakthrough that made news last month the real deal or just hype? Okay, you were not as excited about ChatGPT in the present. How about nuclear fusion?
Well, it's definitely not just hype. It's a big deal. Like, in terms of what they accomplished, it's not only just like ChatGPT. It was very impressive what it's able to do. I'm not sure if it crossed a particular milestone. Maybe it was the first thing that crossed the Turing test, which is, you know, can you fool a human into thinking you're talking to a human? But I honestly think we crossed that in the last 10 years already. The National Ignition Facility, which ran this experiment, has been trying to do this for decades. Where they were trying to create the first self-sustaining nuclear reaction, fusion reaction, to be clear, not fission. Fission is the sort of thing that, you know, it's in your nuclear power plant, the big steam towers you'll see around all over the place. You know, we've had that for a long time. This is fusion, and people have joked that we've been 40 years away from fusion for 40 years. And the fact that they achieved it is a huge deal. But it is a proof. One thing we should know is a proof of concept. No one is claiming that now it's fantastic. Now we can just mass manufacture fusion power plants. We're going to have cheap energy for everyone, or at least renewable energy for everyone. That's basically just powered with heavy water. You know, it's more complicated than that. But like, we're a ways away from commercialization. But we should celebrate this decades-long accomplishment. We created a controlled, like, self-sustaining fusion reaction. When would those happen? In 2 places that we know of, like suns, stars. They do it. Hydrogen bombs. They do it. Neither of which we want to be terribly close to. Now we did it in a lab. And so the fact that they accomplished it is the first proof that we can do it. There is a long road ahead. And this is going to become And this facility is going to become a scientific laboratory for now trying to figure out how to get better reactions. They're going to study it and try to get, but I think that now people are going to start looking for opportunities to figure out how to commercialize the technology, because one of the benefits of fusion reaction is that you get, carbon free, energy, and there's no chance of meltdowns. It theoretically checks off a lot of the boxes of what people want from an energy source.
Hmm. Do you have a timeline on when, like, is this something that we could see in our lifetimes, or is this something that, because the thing to me that, and I may have seen a TikTok video or two, which is
Yeah.
maybe a worse place to get your news from than ChatGPT, that seems like that there would be a lot of stakeholders who would be losers of the proliferation of this kind of technology.
I get this kind of a lot from a lot of new technologies. Any technology that's disruptive, that the powers that be, the oil companies or the whatever, wouldn't want to see this happen. And it's true that these things would lose market share on a lot of fronts. But like when there is such a need and a market for the energy, and also let's just talk oil and gas. You still need oil and gas for for vehicles right now. I know that they're looking for EVs. That's on its way, but also if airplanes, how are you going to fuel those? We're not near electric airplanes and stuff like that. So it's not like gas will go away, but they take a hit theoretically if you suddenly had cheap fusion energy. But it's a ways away. I mean, fusion's not going to be cheap at first. I mean, you have the way it works, and I haven't talked about how it works. Basically, they have a little pellet. Okay, and I'm blanking on the material right now. I don't know if it's a little tritium pellet, I forget what it is, and they shoot lasers at it, like amazingly high powered lasers, in a very precise way, in order to heat it up at a higher temperature than the core of the sun. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So in order to get this thing heat up, I'm pretty sure that was the number. I'll have to double check after the thing. But like, it's really hot. It has to be hotter than the sun because the sun actually has an advantage in fusion. The sun also has the massive gravity of the sun
Hmm.
collapsing a bunch of pressure onto the thing that it's trying to ignite. Okay. So it's a very right now it's a single proof of concept. That's a long way from implementation. Now, in terms of your first question, when would we see this? It's traditionally very foolish to predict technologies in the future, especially fusion. But I was on TV in my underwear, so I can look a little foolish. That's okay. There was, I think this is an in your lifetime kind of technology,
Hmm.
but is it mass adoptable within time that climatologists would say that we would need to cut our carbon emissions by blank time to avoid catastrophic climate change sort of things? That's not a likely bet to get to bail you out of that sort of thing. And so it's not a stop the presses. We should only care about this tech just because there's a lot of steps left to make it viable.
Okay. Christian, I have a question for you from Judy Simon, who wants to talk a little bit about a question from your survivor experience and how you took that into your everyday life. What's the greatest lesson in social dynamics that you took from Survivor back into your normal life? Did watching people make decisions under those circumstances shed any light on the general functioning of human relationships that we might typically take for granted?
Well, so again, this is a great question. I had to think on this one because I did take a lot of things away from Survivor, and I didn't. But one of which I didn't really put into direct thought is how social dynamics work. Because at first I'm like, well, Survivor's a very different environment. We are in a winner take all zero sum game. That said, one thing that was really apparent, especially after I was done with the show, after I had some time to reflect on it, is how Survivor has characters that we are all basically like almost caricatures in a way, or we're cast because we have very particular personalities that that casting is confident that we will show on the island, so we won't be boring TV or something, right? That they're confident, and as a result, we have very clear and distinct personality traits that might be more clear and distinct than your random person on the street you might run into. They might be a little bit more subtle in their personality traits. They're not so we're not shouting at cameras during confessionals, that kind of thing.
Save that for Big Brother.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's an opportunity for us to look at these almost caricature versions of people that we kind of are and say, wow, we are like, you can look at that. Okay, this person is, neurotic. This person wants to be in control. And then when you really look at all of your interactions with that person, how little it mattered the logic of the situation and how much it mattered what their personality was and how that dictated their response. Like that the logic of the situation and giving telling them this is what the situation is, the way they respond was so clearly driven by our very present personality traits. I mean, Angelina is the person who she wants to be the decision maker, like that, and she had very clear ideas of what she wanted to accomplish in different situations. So her solution to most problems were, well, I'm going to come up, here's this idea I want to come up with, and let's see if we can get everyone on board with it. At times, those were good ideas. At times, it wasn't necessarily the best approach. But what dictated that outcome was the personality. If you came up to me with a plan, you'd be like, okay, what's the most complicated plan we could possibly do that would solve this problem? Is it necessarily the best plan? But that's my personality. I like complex things. I like analyzing things. I like overthinking them, overanalyzing them. Right. So, what that means is, so when I'm talking different social dynamics, back in real life, is it's important for me to tailor my request, my sales pitch, or just the news I'm giving to the clear personality traits this person has. I may be more aware of that fact because I was dealing with this almost cartoonish version of that on Survivor. Hope that makes some sense.
Yeah. Do you subscribe to any sort of like personality types, whether it be like an Enneagram or a Myers-Briggs, where if you can sort of like really familiarize yourself with the different personality types there are, you'd have basically some sort of like shorthand of like, if you could ID which personality type you felt confident enough a person was, that you might have an advantage in some of those situations.
Well, that's not the type of thing I'm talking about. Like, let me give you a bit different example of if someone would come up to me at work and tell me that something, oh, this paperwork didn't come through, I'm going like, my personality is I'm going to assume that it was somehow my fault. I didn't do the paperwork right. So if you were approaching, the trait that you're going for me is like, oh, Christian is always worried he did something wrong. And so if you approach me with that knowledge, then you'd say, hey, I know I know you submitted the paperwork on time. For some reason, it didn't go through. Then all of a sudden, like, I react a lot less defensively to what went on. Those kinds of things. Like it's less something that I've seen in grouped up categorizations of things. It's just more noticing trends of how people respond to things and how their sort of theory of mind processes what they've heard. Like, there are people who like to be in control. So if you give them a solution which is, hey, don't do anything, they're not gonna respond well to that. So that's the kind of way that I'm sort of simplifying a particular personality trait as very specific ways that they respond to specific inputs.
Okay. Allie Gertz has a question. What is a debunked fact or theory that you wish was true?
So this is a great question, Allie. So there are a lot of ways that you could take this sort of question and So we're talking about we're talking sort of like science stuff. So some scientific hypothesis that we thought that we've since refuted, or was really pseudoscience and not even science. Okay, that I wish was true. I mean, on the subject of fusion, I mean, one of the easier answers is something like cold fusion. Oh, I wish cold fusion was true. And for those who don't know, cold fusion was this idea that this sort of fusion reaction that takes place in the sun. Maybe you could just do it in a room at room temperature instead of at these enormous heats. And there's a very famous incident by two scientists, so Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann, okay, back in 1989, where they just went up and did a press conference saying, "Hey, guess what? We have cold fusion," and press goes wild.
Right.
Now, yeah, it's great. That's nice. But I'll tell you, in terms now, I'm sure scientists in the audience are shaking their heads, and what a no-no this is. That this is not, if you are a scientist, this is not the process you go through. You don't just go to the press and say, "I did a thing." Okay. If you have a late-breaking result, you go to a scientific conference, and you sign up for a talk at a scientific conference, and you say, "Hey," to your colleagues, other people who can vet your work and know if you've and have a decent idea if what you're saying is reasonable, and say, "Hey, here are our results. Here's our graphs. Here's our plots. Here's our methods. This is what we have." And then you have people asking really tough questions. Or if you'd rather not show it to your colleagues, you publish it. You publish it first in the scientific literature. Okay, and you always want to make sure you've gone through a publication process before you go to the press with a result that can be potentially refuted. So that's a big no-no. So that would be nice. Cold fusion. That's sort of but that's like the easy answer to me, because that was always, in my opinion, obviously pseudoscience, because it didn't make any sense. And of course, it ended up later. It was never, and the way we know is because other scientists tried to replicate what they claimed to do, and it never worked. And they, to this day, still stand by their claims. They just, but the word cold fusion is almost synonymous with bunk. They had to change the name. They had the bupkis, I believe, is that. I forgot the technical term. Thank you, Rob. They in fact had to rebrand it as low energy nuclear reactions now because the name was too toxic, right? But let's go with one that had more like a patina of scientific respectability and came from a more legitimate scientific place. Okay, back in 2020, there was a big announcement after there was a publication.
There was a few.
Yeah. Oh, fair point.
Yeah.
There was a fun big announcement. Okay, it's a fun big announcement about potential signs of life on Venus, in the clouds of the clouds of Venus. These scientists had published a paper in one of the main prestigious scientific journals, like the kind that Evie publishes in. So good journals, right? So and Dr. Evie Jacoda, and and basically saying that they were taking satellite images, spectrographic images of clouds on Venus, which is basically a way of looking at the chemistry of what's on the clouds on Venus. And they said, there's way too much phosphine gas in there. Now, I'm not a chemistry guy, so I just rely on chemistry sources. Phosphine, and the reason that this was interesting is that phosphine gas is not a gas that just hangs around, okay? Kind of like some other gases that they just kind of they dissipate, right? And what produces phosphine gas? Very few things. Ironically, one of the things is, weirdly enough, meth labs produce phosphine gas. So people are like, well, extraterrestrial Walter White, what are we talking about? Is on Venus. But one of the other thing is that it's long been hypothesized that an outside chance of where life could live would be suspended in the clouds of Venus, instead of feeding on a sulfur-based diet. Delicious. Okay. Smells like rotten eggs. And when they would potentially, these microorganisms, the byproduct of their metabolism would almost certainly be phosphine gas. So this was not a crazy idea. So they did some computer analysis and some computer models. They published it under scientific peer review and got it out into the world and made a big announcement. That's an appropriate thing to do. And then the rest of the scientific community did what they're supposed to do, which is analyze it and question it and say, okay, is this what they say? And people replicated the analysis. And sadly to me, they found that there was an error in the data analysis. The computer data analysis artificially inflated the amount of phosphine gas on Venus. So it basically more or less was not true.
Yeah.
And that's this. And why was this sad? It's because we talk about, a lot of people love to think about like extraterrestrial life, like where is it out in the universe? It's out in some distant galaxy. Is it out in some solar system? Maybe in our galaxy. Maybe it's on one of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn. Who knows? But Venus, the idea of having life on Venus right next door, which would have fundamentally different chemistry than our carbon-based chemistry, that would be an astonishing data point for how likely life might be in the universe. And that would have been so cool. Like, how many different ways could life emerge if it can emerge in this horrible, awful acid planet right there?
Mm-hmm.
But alas. So that's a sad one, but that's how the scientific process works.
Mm-hmm.
People replicate it, and if it doesn't pan out, it doesn't pan out.
Mm-hmm. Is that the worst feeling as a scientist, of that you go out with your research and then it comes back, people are like, actually,
It's gotta hurt. It's gotta hurt because
not that it's ever happened to you.
No, it's a total. These things are complicated analyses, right? And we try our best. I remember I was leading up to like a pretty big publication of our work, and shortly before like our final submission, I noticed like I made like a boneheaded mistake in the code, and I was like, oh my goodness, I hope this doesn't change. Thankfully, it didn't change the result like very much, and it wasn't only a minor result in the paper, but I was emailing my professors. I was like, you're gonna hate me, but I switched these two numbers in the code, and it was only by some fluke that it didn't throw me an error that it didn't do this, and we adjusted the paper. It didn't affect the results, thankfully, but that would have sucked. Like, what if it did? We would have had to redraft the paper and basically say, and science is hard, and that's why it's not enough to just look at a paper that someone's published, put a result that someone's out there and say, that's awesome. Other people have got to do it, something similar too, before we, the public who are not experts, believe it.
Okay. Megan asks, what is your favorite guilty pleasure TV show?
Okay. I'm going to more give it a genre because I think there's a lot more to talk about with a genre. And it is documentaries about scams. Okay.
Yeah, I think you've talked to me about this before, of not just that, and like scamming the scammers, right? You like that?
Yeah, I do enjoy the scam. I pretty much everything on the sort of the scam spectrum I enjoy to some degree, and there's a variance of there are some high quality stuff on.
And you love Better Call Saul, a show about a scammer.
They're basically almost every episode, I feel like there's a scam that they run. And so I enjoy that because it's about, maybe the theme here of this episode might be deception. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because people deceiving themselves by making mistakes, people, and scams
Chat
about people.
GPT is all about BSing you.
It's kind of BSing you, right? So
the Saul Goodman of artificial intelligence.
and so like
it's trying to give you what you think you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think
what it thinks you want.
Yeah, I think a lot of these questions are kind of on this theme, and it's and scams are a wonderful example because that's an intentional deception. People are trying to prey on your on your weaknesses in your reasoning or your moments of weakness. Because one thing I should say right off the top, anyone can be scammed. Like when I'm watching these scamming documentaries, there's never a point where if I ever get to a point where I'm like, how stupid is this person that they fell for this scam? And you have to remember that you can be scammed. I can be scammed. You just the right situation, the right tactic. If you have your guard down, you can totally be scammed. I follow people on YouTube who are anti-scamming. Basically, this their entire life is tracking down scammers, reporting on their scams. One last year got scammed. Just like, and to his credit, he went out and said, hey, look, I got scammed. It can happen to me. And this is how it happened. So, but the guilty pleasure part I feel are the documentaries that I feel that Netflix churns out via an algorithm.
Yeah.
Like they're where the editing is the most like on the nose possible. Like you could not possibly miss that this person is the bad guy. These people are the good guys. Like I'm thinking so there these are the kinds of things that I can do like pretty hard work on one screen and have this on Netflix on this other screen. I don't miss a beat. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like the music gets scary when a scary thing's about to happen, and then they edit it in this, you know, like
Yeah.
with the pregnant pauses, and like, oh, this is the energetic part, so we're gonna have a little marimbas, maracas going, and it's like, okay, this is where
Mm-hmm.
tracking down the scammer. The Tinder swindler is gonna get swindled by one of his previously swindled Tinder swindlers, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I enjoy the subject matter, but the guilty pleasure when it's just like, okay, this documentary wrote itself, and they made sure that they used every editing trick imaginable to make sure that you could be comatose and know what's happening.
Yeah. You have
So
any
yeah.
favorites?
So what I really enjoy as guilty pleasure is the Fire Festival documentary on Netflix.
Okay.
I love that one. I have very
Couple of
strong
years
opinion.
back, right?
A couple years back. It's a classic though. I have very strong opinions on Fire Festival documentaries because there are, of course, famously two of them. There's one that dropped on Netflix and one that dropped on Hulu.
Hulu, right?
One on Netflix, while imperfect, is vastly superior than the Hulu one, in my correct opinion. I for a better documentary, so I enjoy. I was all over the Elizabeth Holmes documentaries on the
Okay.
Theranos thing.
Yeah.
I could have been the RHAP dropout correspondent if I had thought it through. I consumed every possible piece of media on the Theranos scam imaginable. Like when the dropout series came on Hulu with Amanda Seyfried, that was I watched that with Emily, and that was an interactive experience because because I knew all the twists and turns of the scandal. What I would do is we'd watch it, and then a new scene would come on, and I would pause the scene. And I'd say, Emily, in this scene, this character is going to say this to this character, and they're going to reveal that they know the blood test is not working, and they're going to be fired on the spot, and then they're going to go, and then they're going to become depressed.
Okay.
And scene.
And what's Emily's reaction when you do that? Is it like, wow, like you've done it again, or it's like, okay, we get it?
Well, I think that if it was mundane stuff, she would be, yeah, we get it. But when it's so weird, I was like, okay, like some of the fact patterns on a case like this
She's
are so
still impressed
strange.
with you.
She's still impressed
Okay, well, that's
because
beautiful.
it's so weird. So no, it's because it's so weird
And unrelatable. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just also like I come alive. Like I'm just like, okay, this is the La Matanza scene.
You're like
So
the Benoit Blanc of Netflix.
So I haven't seen the new one. I enjoyed the
I guess
first one.
Benoit
But,
Blanc is the Benoit Blanc of Netflix.
that's a fair point. That's a
Yeah.
fair point. I mean, the scenes were so surreal that like, okay, like the scene will start with like this guy, this reporter is going to walk into his editor's office, and I was like, okay, Emily, in this scene, the editor is going to pantomime being an Italian fisherman stabbing fish with a spear, and scene, and that's what happens. And so like that's how
Wow.
bizarre it is. Yeah. So like because anyway, so for those who are into so anyway, the reason I love it
I feel like you should be
because
doing this on a Twitch stream.
oh that'd be fun. I missed the opportunity of this one because this was a challenge. So I was disappointed because the dropout did well enough that they canceled the planned Jennifer Lawrence version where they're going to make a movie where she was going to portray Elizabeth Holmes. And I was very sad because I like Jennifer Lawrence and I would have liked to seen that film. But I mean, one thing I love about it because it reveals all the ways that we can be fooled. And these are very smart people who are working for this company, and a lot of people poured hundreds of millions of dollars into this. And how did that happen? And so that's I feel like one of the better ones. I think Fire Festival is a bit more of a guilty pleasure. Tinder Swindler is a very guilty pleasure for me. that kind of stuff.
But do you rewatch them after you've seen them before?
I've seen Fire Festival probably 15 times.
Wow.
Yeah, it's one you can just play. Again, you can put it on the side and like, okay, this is the scene where,
Mm-hmm.
they got to get the water out of the thing. Okay, all right. It's like, so it's
Mm-hmm.
comforting in a weird way.
Okay. Trevor wants to know, what was your favorite non-science course you took while at university and why?
Okay. I had the pleasure of taking a number of non-science courses in college. I minored in music in college.
Yes.
I'm a clarinet player. I played in the orchestra and the band, and I had a concerto I gave in my senior year. So in order to get my minor, I took music theory courses, which was cool. I got to do some composition.
Mm-hmm.
And probably weirdest ones were like the music history courses. Okay, so I took a course in a couple of different forms of music history. One was medieval music history,
Okay.
so like Gregorian chants. All right, so it was kind of wild because like one time we like for like our field trip, we went to like the campus chapel and we did Gregorian chants at midnight. Like it was a pretty cool thing. But the thing I'll never forget were the exams, because a lot of music history courses have listening exams where they will give you like material like MP3s. At this point, it was a CD when I was in college. They give you a CD full of material to listen to, and then when you go into class for the exam, they will play a small excerpt, and you have to identify the song by the excerpt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Gregorian chant, that creates some particular challenges, because what you're supposed to do is pick out certain context clues. You're supposed to be like, okay, the fact that it's this general tempo means it's probably from this era, and here are the composers from this era. They tend to use these kinds of patterns of how they jump around, and this indicates it's probably this composer. Therefore, it's this song from the repertoire you're supposed to memorize. The context clues, right? But with Gregorian chant, there was a particular era where all of their music was sponsored by the church. So all of their songs were basically just the word like Gloria or Alleluia stretched out over 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it would go is that it would be just the word for Alleluia, just a syllable stretched out, and they go up and down, like almost that tempo, like it's jumping all over the place. The composers were so bored with just that one syllable, they had to they just went nuts with the notes that they had people sing. And the problem was I remember there was one exam where there were two songs where 95% of the entire song, for one of them, it was the syllable ah, and for the other song, it was the syllable ah. That was the only difference that I could really discern, given all the little random, patterns of notes going back and forth. So I remember I used my primitive MP3 player. I ripped the CD, primitive MP3 player, and I set up a little thing that would randomly select 5-second clips of both of these songs, and it would just randomly select them, play them at me, tell me which one it was, and I'm just like okay, just test myself like for hours. And so I knew every little lilt, every little note flourish, every little singing flourish of this Gregorian chant from Palestrina, from the later period of medieval music history. So I just nailed that one question on the exam. So that was an experience for my my
Yeah.
classical music exam.
Do you still play your clarinet?
It's not as much recently. I was all the way through graduate school and my postdoc, which was a fun experience because like I'd be like working in the robotics lab. That would be my job, my PhD. But sometimes I would have a concert that night. So I would come in the afternoon after lunch and come in with in a full tuxedo and just sit down and start doing work and just see if anyone says anything. And it would take a little bit, and people's like, "What are you doing?" "Oh, concert tonight." And I remember
Mhm.
my major professor, my PhD advisor, saw it like my clarinet, which in orchestral clarinet, you typically actually have not one, but two clarinets. The typical clarinet that your kid might have, going to middle school, is called
Yeah.
a B flat clarinet. Okay. Um, but it's also an orchestra. It's very common to have a different version called an A clarinet, which is slightly larger, slightly. And the difference is, so as because it's slightly larger, it plays one little piano half step lower. And so that means that for certain songs that would require you, instead of playing with 6 sharps in your key signature, which basically means every note you see, don't play that note, play some other note, you instead just switch the clarinet, and now it's much easier to play. So if you're watching an orchestra, pay attention in an orchestra piece, pay attention, watch the clarinets, and especially during Romantic era, you know, like 1800s era music, you might see the clarinetists pull their mouthpiece off the top, slam it on another clarinet, put it up, like sometimes in like 2 seconds flat. That's them switching from their B flat to an A. So as a result, I'd have this clarinet case that was 2 clarinets in one. It was a big briefcase. And so people
Wow.
assumed I was carrying like classified documents in this thing. It's like, no, it's my clarinet. So
Christian, let's take a question from Patrick. Patrick wants to know, in Survivor, speaking of classified documents, in Survivor, when gathering information, what do you consider to be of the highest value? In other words, what information do you keep closest to the chest, and how do you navigate taking that from another person?
So that's always an important question. So the question is like, when is a secret most valuable, and when would you keep it a secret? And let's analyze this from the extremes. And maybe we'll engage in some minor spoilers from Survivor 43, the season that just aired as a timing. Some minor spoilers. The classic example, Survivor 43, some post-merge spoilers. Spoilers ahead. Spoilers ahoy. That there's a point where an idol, where Dwight gets voted out of the game and is assumed he has an idol, but no one knows that he had passed it off to Jesse right before Tribal Council. Okay. This is perhaps the most juicy secret maybe in the history of the game. Like I have a hard time thinking anything like it. And the reasons are it's so extremely powerful. It's because not only does no one know that Jesse has the idol, no one thinks that idol is still in the game. Nobody. Everyone assumes Dwight took it out of the game with them. So as a result, no one is waiting for that to rear its head. Okay, that is so much, and as a result, there's no pressure at all for Jesse to ever have to feel like he has to tell someone about it, because they might just ask around like, hey, who has that idol? Because no one thinks it exists, right? That's something that you have every reason to keep to yourself, unless you have some extreme reason you want to build trust in someone. But I think that even then it might not be worth it.
Right.
But that contrasts a lot with how idols might typically work. When we're talking about secrets, a lot of times people start first thinking about idols. And I think that's a reasonable thing to think about, because there's lots of schools of thought that people say really dogmatically about it, right? I've seen people say that you should never tell anyone you have an idol. Every time you do that, you get voted out. So that's just not true. That's just not true. Sometimes you use it effectively. Like I think of the fact that I remember like when Malcolm at his first really amazing moment in his run on Survivor in Survivor Philippines season 25 is when Lisa Welchel discovers he has an idol from doing his laundry. He basically holds it up at Tribal Council saying, you know, like I remember from when I was listening to the Evolutionary Strategy, you would like Josh was describing it's like Malcolm is holding a gun. It's like he's holding the entire Tribal Council hostage. He cannot be, and he backs out of Tribal Council without ever having to play that idol. Like, it's amazing. And it was an amazing move because he revealed it to the group that he had it, and he got more because of it. So sometimes it's useful to reveal it. And there are other examples too, I'm sure, that I'm not thinking of. But let me talk about a little subtler time when the idol secret is problematic. If everyone knows that there is an idol, but don't know who has it, okay, it can be a problem to keep it a secret. And that's because when people think there's an idol that no one knows where it's at, that starts to lead to very conservative decision making about how you stack votes, or at least it drives the decision making. Like, do we split votes? So we don't know if they have an idol. And splitting votes can be dangerous. Just ask Stephen Fishback, from the second time out. He hated the split vote result, and he said so, right? It's a risk. I've always said it's a risk to split a vote. And so if all your allies are running around, it's like, Christian, I feel like we have to split the vote. This actually happened to me. This happened to me with when I had the idol. I had just found the idol, and we were about, in my season, we were about to vote out Alec. Okay. And Angelina at that point, she had flopped from the Goliaths. She had been burned by them and was working with the Davids. And she was working actually with me a lot. I have to give her credit. She worked with me a lot during that time, and I appreciate it. But she was really scared that she was going to get idled out if Alec had an idol and would play at a tribal council, because she's received votes at all these tribal councils. But I'm sitting on the idol. I know that he doesn't have it. And so I have to find a way to diffuse. So she wants to do a very elaborate split vote plan. It was more than a typical split vote. I don't remember the details of it, but it would have been dangerous if she tried to push it. So it created a problem for me that I didn't want to have to tell her that I had the idol, but I wanted to not do this plan that would have been risky because of it. So I had to come up with an excuse that we ended up stacking all the votes on Alec anyway. So that's a different kind of secret than what Jesse had. Jesse's secret was so much more powerful than what I had. So there was maybe a situation where maybe I should have revealed it to Angelina in that moment. Maybe. I'm not saying it was. So you have, and so that's sort of a second tier of secret. There's also the secret of something is going to get out anyway. It's going to come out. If you know that you're going to have to play this particular advantage, and you're going to have to play it early enough in the game that people are going to react to it later. And people do not like being surprised by advantages in Survivor.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, so when people find I think back to Survivor Heroes versus Villains, one of my favorite seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Russell did not like it when Parvati played two idols.
No, he did not.
It did not. Even though it didn't affect him directly, he didn't like that it took control away from him, but also he didn't like the surprise of it. People like to be in the know. So when you start playing advantages that you didn't know exist, and you were supposed to be allies with that person, then people will start to question, how close are we if they didn't tell me that secret? So so those are sort of the three tiers of secrets off the top of my head. Ones that you could get away with, no one could ever know, potentially. Awesome, right? There are ones where you might be able to get away with it for a long while, but it's creating problems. Maybe you want to reveal it. Or three, it's gonna come out. You might want to get ahead of the news with the people that you want to make sure they know, because you don't want them to be surprised. Makes some sense, Rob? I rambled for a bit there. I didn't give you much in there. So
it makes sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of focused on the trinkets of the game, the advantages, because those are the simplest things that that happens. And I think we sort of see a little bit of how that goes awry from the last couple of seasons, where you had that knowledge is power advantage.
Right.
People especially the first time the knowledge is power advantage is out there, no one even knows what the heck this thing is or what it could be.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost tier one secret, right? Whereas if you hold on to that sort of tier one secret, you saw what Jesse did in his season. I mean, he pulled off one of the most, I think, memorable and I think effective moves that we've seen in Survivor in a very long time. And that's the power of such a secret. And that's how I would evaluate whether you keep it or not.
You and I haven't had the chance to talk since the Survivor season has ended. Did you have any thoughts on Survivor 43 spoilers incoming in Gabler's win of Survivor 43?
So I was I don't want to say I was in shock at what happened, but I was more, it wasn't what I expected. So I was processing it. I mean, it was wild to watch. I will say that the week before the finale, I did a rare thing, which I traveled to a watch party.
Yes.
For Survivor. I went of one Davey Rickenbacker up in Atlanta, and he was having a watch party. And I had an unusual opening in my schedule that normally I can't go places Wednesday night because I have class the next morning, but I didn't that day. So I drove up to Atlanta to went to Davey's party.
Mhm.
And people, when you go to a party, you talk to a lot of the fans, it's fun. A lot of them want to know who you think is going to win. Okay. And I told them, and I meant this sincerely, is that honestly, I really think it's an open field. If I had to put money if you forced me to put money on the roulette table on one of these players, I would put it on Jesse, just because of his positioning. He's made I have every reason to believe that the jury would like him from what we can tell. I'll get to that in a second. But also he's almost guaranteed, unless he really blows something, to get to the fire making. And at that point, of all these 5 people, he's close to a 50-50 shot of getting to the final 3. I'm like, I put my money on him. But I think there was a chance for all of them to win, depending upon the scenario. So I was telling people that, so like I said, so I wouldn't count out anyone. I certainly wouldn't count out Owen. I wouldn't count out Gabler. I wouldn't count out, Cassidy. I wouldn't count out Carla. Obviously, Carla. I said that to people. And the other thing that I said was the thing that we as an audience had the least insight into is what the jury thinks of the contestants. By far the least.
Mhm.
Like, we don't see the jury could go off and have all kinds of opinions for all kinds of reasons. And we, the audience, only saw how they interacted on the show, very little about how they reacted after the fact. So there's very little penetration. Now, I'm not going to say I saw Gabler coming. I definitely did not, to be clear. But that was my reaction.
Okay. I'm just trying to think in terms of some of our other conversations. I feel like that you've described a lot of Survivor in terms of like having the most relationships with the different players. I was just trying to think if that might explain the Gabler win in any way based on some of the other work you've done on this subject in the past.
It's hard to say. I mean, because like because the situation is tricky, because even we see a lot of things on the show,
Mm-hmm.
and it's one of the places where what we don't see can matter the most. It could be not only. I mean, I've talked about the show in relationships in terms of things that we as viewers can objectively count, things that cannot be edited away. Like, we know that Gabler was on the island with Sammy. We know he was on, we know that Cassidy was on the island with Owen. These are objective facts that we can count. What can we discern that couldn't be washed away with the editing filter, right? Because then we at least have confidence in that data, right? In terms of the nature of those relationships, we get vignettes, right? Of their interactions. But one thing we definitely don't see is the interaction of the jurors. And it doesn't necessarily mean something nefarious on the jury, but like maybe there's sometimes just an attitude about how people feel that could have been little things on the island that become bigger things when you're on the jury. And again, I'm not saying that's what the case is, but these are things, if they happened, we wouldn't have seen. And also there are things we don't see on the island. And like there are times where little things get said on the island that stick with people that are like, you know what? I'm not sure. It might not even be like, oh, I don't like this person as a result. It's like, I don't know if that person really was in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes so nebulous as who was in charge of a vote.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's just and I think that becomes a really tricky issue. Like, who is in charge of a vote? And if your people are trying to come up with reasons to vote for people or trying to see who they should vote for, who's in charge? If they all voted for the person, is it the person who said, hey, let's vote that person? Or did the other person put out a subtle signal that they should be voted for? Or was there a secret conversation where they colluded to throw the vote in a certain way?
You said this about, I believe it was Mike White.
That's a weird thing to say.
Yeah.
I mean, which is why I'm hesitant to ever give a winner pick, based upon what I see on the show. It's one of the reasons. It's because, I mean, I think that honestly, the best information you could get, even though it could be a little spoilery, is when we're looking at your exit interviews, Rob. I mean, I think it's the closest that we as an audience get before the finale of getting people's attitudes towards different players. But that's tricky because it can almost be a spoiler if you're careful.
And what would you, if you were doing that exercise, what would you be listening for? What is a person who voted out of the game? What is their feeling about another person?
Yeah, I mean, the if you could almost do like a one of those word clouds
Yeah,
of names that get mentioned,
right.
and like I remember, and if there are any names that show up, you're like, oh, actually, that name wasn't on my radar. That
Hmm.
name wasn't necessarily pertinent to the discussion. I think I saw some commentary about the season that people said that whoever wins fire making wins the show or something. I think maybe a big Gordon Holmes talking about this on Twitter or something like that.
Okay.
Remember anything like this? Or
I
like
think that there was some things in the exit interviews that was
X
said
interviews.
about
Yeah,
how, among that final three, I think that the jury felt like that was going to be a big point for whoever did that.
and honestly, this could be a place where I mean, for the super fans of the show who miss the Ponderosa videos, this is a good reason to have the Ponderosa videos. They would give you at least little insights as to how people felt, kind of like in their day or so after going out the door, about different people, and you might be surprised. I mean, keep in mind we talk about all those relationships that on the show that can emerge from just people being together, but only a few of those are going to get highlighted. But a lot of but we don't see all the ones that we don't see are a
Hmm.
lot of the ones that come into play when people are voting on the jury.
Yeah.
So my general take, I just to make sure I answer your question in a fulsome way, which loathe it that I answer your question too briefly. Yeah, I was surprised, legitimately surprised, but I was trying to piece it together. Part of me like laughed just because it was not set up. I felt like super well in that finale, though I believe you did a podcast talking about how this was maybe set up all along. Is that correct?
Hiding
Or
in
what was
plain
that?
sight. Yeah, it was one
Hiding
of the
in plain
most
sight.
fun things I've done in recent memory on the podcast, where I felt like a lot of people were really confused about the Gabler win, and I felt
Mhm.
like while this was not my defense of why Gabler should be the winner, that I thought that there was that some explanation of why it happened, and then also I thought that the editors kind of told a cool story this season of a guy who was hiding in plain sight. And they gave us like a lot of clues along the way about how Gabler was going to be the winner. And so it was a very unconventional winner. And I actually think that the storytellers did a pretty good job of giving that to us without shoving it down our throat.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. I look forward to listening to that. Well, once I sort of process everything that's happened from the season, and like the and one thing I would recommend to any big fans of the show listening is that there's a lot you don't see on the show. I know it's almost cliched to say that,
Hmm.
and a lot of these people's votes, while they might not be like necessarily like these are votes that are personal, but they are personal a lot of time to the voter. Like they might feel very strongly about what they voted and for what reasons. So I don't have strong opinions as to why people voted the way they voted. I'm sure you get many different sides of the story from talking to different people,
Sure.
but I would really advise withholding judgment if you are just a viewer
Hmm.
watching the show, as to taking any particular sides on a vote. I think that's something that I especially came away sensitive from my experience on the show. It's like I was on the jury. I remember the conversations, and I remember seeing how people talked about jurors and why people voted for juries the way they did. And I'm like, oh, that wasn't right. I mean, I was there. I mean, like that's not why that person voted. Like you trust me, you thought that person was going to vote that. I was like, you would laugh if you knew how people might have voted in a different scenario. Like, you have so little insight from an audience, and I sympathize with that. And I think the show, it would be great if they found a way to communicate that, because that's not the audience's fault that they don't have good insight. And so if the show can
Yeah.
find a way to communicate that, I think that it doesn't need to be such a like knock me over surprise. When someone like Gabriel wins, and I'm sure that I don't know how Gabler feels about people being so surprised he won. If I won and people are like, I was really surprised you won. I'm like, why are you surprised? I thought
Hmm.
I did well. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Christian, we have a question from Nick, who writes and says, Dr. Christian, thank you for taking questions again. These podcasts are always outstanding. I just want to say I used to respect you a lot. That is until I saw a tweet of yours last year favoring Fahrenheit over the far superior Celsius. I will say that favoring in this email is spelled FAVOURING.
I see. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I love to hear you defend this very cold take. As a lover of science, how could you not love the metric system? All the best and thanks again. That's from Nick.
All right, Nick, I appreciate you throwing down the gauntlet or throwing down. I don't know how you pronounce throwing across the pond. Is there 3 U's in it? I don't know. But it's a fair question to ask me. It is funny to see like tweets I put out like a year ago or something, or like it's a come back and people have questions about it. Yeah, I basically said I responded to someone else's tweet who said Celsius sucks. And I was like, I don't necessarily agree that Celsius sucks, but what I think that Fahrenheit is, my opinion is that it's a useful measure for everyday human experience. Okay.
Okay.
So let's do. So
now,
yeah, go on.
Now, when we're talking about metric and the imperial system, is that the
the English, yeah, you know what, honestly, I'm blanking on it, but whatever it is,
yes.
go on.
Okay, but we're only talking about temperature. We're not getting into kilometer, units of distance, weight, only temperature.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I'm going to draw that contrast as well. So in science, we call it the SI, or the International Scientific Standard. So Scientific International SI standard. That's metric. That's what we call it, SI in science, right? And I think that, meters,
Favoring.
I favor like things like meters, millimeters, and kilograms, for a reason. I mean, I live in the United States, so I have to use English units, like your feet, your pounds. I'm used to it, but I can acknowledge the utility, how useful it is to you have meters for a couple of reasons. One, I know exactly how many millimeters are in a meter. I don't have to think about it. It's 1,000. I know how many milligrams are in a kilogram. How many grams are in a kilogram. It's 1,000. It's said like in the name, in the suffix, in the prefix, it tells you how the conversions. 12 inches in a foot, 3 feet in a yard, 5,280 something feet in a mile. I mean, that's ridiculous. Like, that's too many. When you have lots of hard conversions to memorize, it just leads to problems. I mean, famously, one of the NASA Mars landers crashed in part because of a unit translation from English to SI units, right? So there is definitely an argument for all these other units to be useful over English, over feet and pounds. And everyone agrees on seconds, though, even though that becomes 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, whatever. Okay. So only talking about temperature. And there's a couple of things, differences here is that I'm talking about everyday human experience as a scale, okay, that I can tell you how hot it is, that if you want a scale for how, like, for something you want to describe in your physical life, it's nice to have a reasonable range of that scale between like 0 and 100, okay? Then you can say, oh, it's 100 out. Oh my goodness, that's hot. Okay. Oh, it's 0. That's as cold as I've ever been in, right? Whereas, it's between 0 and whereas the everyday human, so there's more resolution on that scale. And I think about, like, where do I see temperature the most in my life? Is when I'm adjusting the thermostat. When you have a thermostat war in your house. Do I want it 68? Do I want 70 or 71? Right. Those degrees, they matter to me. Right. That unit of 1 makes it a good scale. It's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Even though the Fahrenheit scale, which 32 degrees is freezing, 212 is boiling. Rob, do you know where 0 and 100 come from on the Fahrenheit scale? Do you know where they originated from?
No.
this is why a lot of people make fun of Fahrenheit, and it's something funny to make fun of. Let me see. I make sure I get the name right. But yeah, Daniel Gabriel Fahrenheit, invented the Fahrenheit scale. I think 1724 is when he proposed it way back when. So 0 degrees was as cold as you could make water before it freezes when you put a ton of salt in it. So when you put salt in water, it freezes at lower temperatures. So he tried to put as much salt in the water as he could, and he tried to freeze it, and it froze at what he now called 0 degrees, 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And 100 degrees Fahrenheit was the rectal thermometer reading of a cow.
Okay.
that's where it came from. So it's silly where it came from. But just because it came from somewhere silly doesn't mean that the scale in practice is actually just because but the scale in terms of the gradation that he happened to come across by this happens to be useful. And now the one thing that kind of stinks about it is that in terms of everyday human experience, it's nice. So don't use that thermometer. But 32 degrees. Remembering that 32 degrees is freezing is kind of like, you got to remember that, because if you go outside in your car and the roads are icy, you want to know that 32 is the limit when things start to freeze, right? That's whereas the Celsius scale, 0 is freezing of water, and 100 is boiling of water at atmospheric temperature. Okay. So it is a use. So Fahrenheit happens to be a useful scale for just like human, like stuff that I do every day. That's why I like it. As opposed to Celsius, like when people like 30 degrees Celsius, it's really hot. And you would never in your going outside days or in your thermostat have to mess with anything above 30 on the Celsius scale. And so that's entirely, in terms of a convenient scale I reference, between 0 and 100, not super useful. In addition to that, in terms of science, if I'm doing scientific calculations, what I would be doing thermodynamics as a engineering student, we don't use Celsius, we use Kelvin, okay? Which is the same, for which 0 is not the freezing temperature of water, it's absolute 0. And you need to use that as a scale because that tells you how much energy, helps tell you how much energy is in the system. Basically, 0 Kelvin is minus 270 degrees Celsius and minus 460 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So if I'm doing scientific calculations, a lot of times I'm using Kelvin. Now, I'm sure other people do use Celsius, but in their science, in a scientific laboratory, that makes sense, because then you are going to multiply degrees C that you change by the mass times the thermal, by the energy density of the material, and you know how much energy is in it, right? So when we're using in science, that's a different context where that scale will be useful. But what I'm trying to say, it feels cold, it doesn't necessarily need to add to the scientific, to the energy density of water, right?
Okay.
So that's why, like when I talk about Fahrenheit, it's a useful scale. Sometimes you just come up with scales that are useful. There are scales for all kinds of things that just describe our feelings about stuff. There's I guess on the subject of poo, there's a softness scale of your poo. It's called I talked to Dr. Joe on Survivor about this. I said so he asked me to describe it. And so I said it's about a 3 on the Bristol scale. It's like, oh, the Bristol scale? Yeah, I know the Bristol scale. So
yeah, what does the Bristol scale go from what to what?
It goes from 0 to 7. So 7. I think it's because they didn't want to have too many different gradations of how watery it was, but that's basically what it tells you is how watery it is.
And 7 is like
it's
like
the
a
most,
diamond. Yes.
No, it's the opposite. 0 is like it's the diamond. 7 is the is the most watery. So that's the Bristol scale. And that some doctor researcher was very proud that he got the scale named after them. I don't think that was a joke. I think that they were probably like that. I think gastroenterologists take their job very seriously, and as they should.
Yeah,
serious business.
Okay. We have a question from Alan who wants to know what is the #1 most underrated skill for performing well on Survivor?
I think I wanted to clarify. I think 1 is the lowest in the Bristol scale, because I know you wanted to go back to that topic.
Okay.
So,
so #1 for #2. Yeah.
I think it's so. Yeah, fantastic. So, underrated skill. I got this question. I had to think about it because I talk about a lot of skills on the show, and that can be useful. And I was trying to think of one that I hadn't really talked about. And the idea that on some level you have to manage your social calendar when you're out on the show is a surprisingly underrated skill. Like, especially at the merge, you watch these seasons with when they merge. Like right now, there'll be 13 people at the merge. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That's a crazy number of people that people have to run around with at the merge. So you have to find time to make sure you spend some time with all those people, because you don't know if those people, if one person, and you have to find a way to do it where it doesn't look like it's obvious that you're running around with everyone else and trying to create alliances with everyone, but you might not necessarily know. But you want to have a connection because you might need their vote soon. You might want to have a good relationship with that person. You shouldn't write them off. So there are some people who are very good at just finding just impromptu things to do with other players, and it might be doing a chore. Like they're like, oh, we go and wash the dishes together. It's our thing. I remember Allison would do that with Gabby. Like, we're gonna go do the dishes, which on the surface level, I was like, okay, I'm glad someone's doing the dishes. Then you think about it for half a second. It's like, oh no, this is Allison actually being smart and finding a little alone time with Gabby to talk. And obviously, there's everyone going off to the water well. That's a classic thing. Hey, let's go off to the water well. But there are more subtle things where people will sit around camp and have little rituals. I remember, I think that I'll use another example of Dr. Allison again. She would have a thing where she would give breakfast orders. They would make fictional breakfast orders of what they would order for breakfast that day. That was the thing that she liked.
I would hate that so much.
I did not participate. I was forced to participate one time, and I'm already not a breakfast food guy, let alone on Survivor. It didn't change my opinion. So, but that was her bonding thing, I believe, with Kara and Gabby at the merge, and so that's the thing that they did. And so just or finding surreptitious ways to be alone in a way that's not suspicious with people, so that way you continue to make those connections and find time to strategize. Rob, we actually talked about this on, I think, the first podcast we did together after my deep dive with you. At the time, we were talking about season 38.
Back when deep dives were deep dives.
Yeah. Before they were shallowish, don't go too deep in the pool dives, you'll run afoul of the concrete at the bottom. We were talking about Edge of Extinction. And at that point, we were right before the end of the season, and we were trying to predict who, people at that point, Rick Devens was was target number one. And one of the things that we talked about was, he could, because he'd been so openly and clearly targeted by everyone, he could run around looking for idols all the time. He didn't need a social calendar. In fact, and I think and so you floated, we're talking about it. It's like, hey, why not work with Rick Devens? At least, at least give him an option to maybe to survive that might look like something other than idols. That might tie him up in meetings in such a way where he can't spend as much time finding
That's a good idea.
And I think that ultimately, I mean, Chris Underwood might argue that's what he did at the end of the game. And so I'm not going to say I gave Chris Underwood that idea. Maybe I did, through some kind of causal shenanigans. But but there is a finite amount of time on that island. I know it seems like forever. I know that there are times, we played.
Well, especially in the 26-day game.
Yes. Oh, it's so limited. Like the example I constantly give, even when I had at the merge, we had a 3-day cycle at the merge. So we met we merged. We had a day, another day, and the third day was our immunity challenge in our season. And I talked to Kara for like 1 minute. And she's one of the people I really wanted to talk to, but there was just so much going on. Goliaths were peeling off Goliath to talk to them. I was trying to peel people off. How do you get her on your social calendar? I think like day 33, I feel was like the first day that Kara and I stayed up at night, and we just Kara, can we just talk about your life story together? We stayed up at night. I remember the producers, we were up at night, we're talking by the beach, and finally got a chance, because Kara would be so easily interrupted by everyone else. We never get her story. I would never get her story. I said, Kara, let's go out to the beach. We have a lot to catch up on. And I remember the camera person at night came over to see us talking, and I could clearly see the camera person was like, no, and just walked away. So they were not
Mhm.
interested in our conversation for some reason. Like, but I thought it took that long to really have a deeper conversation with Kara. And probably because I packed my
Day
social
33.
calendar
I mean,
tight.
that would be a week after the season is over now.
Yeah, it's really late, right? I mean, we definitely interacted, we talked some strategy, but like we didn't have the chance to bond. And I really, but I felt like I was trying, but I did not like. It's almost like really scheduling your time in real life. There are people who will say, bound off your personal time and protect it. If you're like a busy, if you're like
Oh
a
my
busy,
God.
yeah,
What a
like professional.
concept.
Yeah, I know. It's funny. I chuckled just saying it. That's what you're told to do, right? And and so like those are strategies that you can actually apply to the show because the time really is finite. There are a finite number of conversations, even though it seems like you're there a long time. And so so I think that's something that's underrated because you wouldn't be, and when I say underrated, because you would never see that on the edit on the show that you're watching because they are intentionally clipping down to the scenes that are most important to tell the story. So you don't see how people manage their time. You don't see how many conversations that they had. I would be fascinated to see the Outlook calendar for a Survivor season. When was Carla talking to Jesse? When was Cassidy talking to Gabler, or whatever it was? That would be fascinating. But I'm
Yeah.
sure we'll never see it.
Well, it's also a challenge because you're talking about like making time to have like almost like bonding time with people to get to the point where you need to go slow to go fast. You need, it's almost like that the people that were bonded like in the pre-merge, maybe when you have more downtime, are able to sort of like have these relationships of like, okay, let's just do a quick check-in. Whereas like these strangers that you meet at the merge, it must be very hard to sort of establish that sort of like level setting conversations that would allow you to work together moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and just to reference the conversation that we had, you can reference our recap podcast that we did this past season. We talked about the number of people who have met each other by the time
Mhm.
they had them at the merge, and it's comparatively very few people in this current modern format because they start off on small tribes where they know very few people, and they never swap to meet new people before the merge, so they
Mhm.
know so very few people. It's got to like that
Yeah.
merge must be chaos, is
Yeah.
my opinion.
I wonder if it's a little bit of a sort of like unheralded benefit of going to Shipwheel Island. Not that that has been super fruitful, but it has been in some ways where I think like Dre and Marianne kind of bonded in season 42. We saw Owen and Noel really sort of like establish their relationship, which ends up being important in the season. Even Gabler went to the very first Shipwheel Island and made a relationship with Carla and Dwight. And so it could be where then at least when you get to the merge, like that's maybe you could have some of those quicker conversations.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's those. I mean, those little conversations. I mean, you're starving for information
Hmm.
at that point in the game. When you're stuck on a little tribe of six, I mean, you get to know those five people probably pretty well, pretty quickly, and you have endless curiosity for who these people are in other tribes. You end up speculating like, oh, that person, they look really young. Are they as young as they look? Or it's like, are they really? Or it's like, oh, is that guy have a jacket that says Slamtown on it? I didn't notice this. Yeah, it said Slamtown on the jacket. Oh, that makes sense
Hmm.
now. Like you're starving for information. So there's you. So one those Scipio Islands sort of function of at least some information exchange. And maybe because you're so starved for any other kind of human attention, because you only have the five people to talk to, that might lead to a bond, even though the time together is short.
Okay. We have a question from Gertie. Gertie said, in a Survivor alternate universe, what kind of Survivor player would Jeff Probst be? Do you think he could win?
So I love this question because I mean I'm sure people ask Jeff this all the time. I think Jeff has talked about how people ask him how he think he would do on Survivor all the time,
Hmm.
and so just like we talked before about like what are about the personality traits of survivors, like a particular survivor, like what would Jeff if you were sitting in a casting room across from, I guess, host Jeff, which would be a trippy sci-fi scene.
Yeah. I
What
like the
would
cut of your jib. Yeah.
well, what would the casting directors like if I were casting a reality show, what would I see in Jeff as a potential reality show contestant? And I think and what they probably look at, and by the way, I am not a casting expert, so I'll just say that right off the bat. But I would look at his life. It's like, what is Jeff like in his life? I mean, he's a guy who started off as the host of this otherwise experimental reality show called Survivor,
Mhm.
and it became a juggernaut overnight. And over time, he has ascended to become the showrunner. So, well, this guy, he's an ambitious guy. He's a guy who likes to seek out leadership positions. So, if I'm trying to figure out where does he fit on the cast of a show, I was like, well, who's going to be wanting to take the lead? I imagine someone like Jeff would. I mean, what else? What else is there about Jeff when I look at him that stands out? It's like, well, he works out a lot. The guy is fit. I have to tell you, there's one thing that he talked about during the 5.5 hour filibuster challenge. He talked about his workout routine that he has a push day and a pull day and a leg day. I don't understand these terms. I asked John for all that information. But he described his real workout routine. He takes it very seriously. He also talked about how when he's back at base camp, he doesn't necessarily just sleep in his bed. Sometimes he will just put a hammock out at night so that way he can at least have some minor approximation of what the survivors are going through. So he's a
Oh,
person who
wow.
that's what he said. So he's a person who he craves that authenticity of an experience or the adventure, I would say, of it. I mean, I think that like he doesn't have to do that. He could just be like, I had a hard day at work. I'm just going to go sleep in the bed. And so in a way, it's almost like he's trying to prove in that moment that he can do it too, if he had to. So maybe he's a person out there who feel like he will have a lot to prove on the island, right? So how would that manifest? Would he try to do really well in the challenges? Would he try to lead an alliance to make a big move? And so with that caricature, I guess, of Jeff that I've constructed, well, how would that person do on a Survivor season? I mean, there's the classic cliche about people being leaders and that not going well, but I don't know. Is that really true anymore? I'm not necessarily. It used to be the classic, oh, that person's the leader. Russell Swan, why are you being the leader again? Even though you shouldn't be the leader, and it didn't work out for him, poor guy. But he could, because he really wanted, that's in his bones what he wanted to do. But I think that I don't necessarily think that dooms a Jeff. I think that as long as Jeff listens, I think it's another aspect of Jeff. He wants to have talk shows where he brings on guests and here's their side of things. He tries to get things out of people, right? And so I think that that's what he tries to do, at least in principle, at tribal council, or specifically at the mat chats.
Yeah.
He will ask you when you're at the mat chat something that he thinks might stir the pot, that he sees. Like, I remember when the brochachos became a thing on my season. And Dan was talking about the brochachos openly at the mat chat. And I'm like, okay, all right, Dan, I appreciate it, but not in public. And Jeff very gamely turns to Angelina and says, Angelina, what do you think about the brochachos? And I think that it was a rare, like, stunned silence from Angelina, and she didn't even know how to respond to that question, which makes sense for Angelina. So he knows how to try to push people's buttons in a way. So maybe it's something he could use to distract.
Do you feel like that Jeff would like play the like deception game on Survivor? I feel like I struggle to see him really playing the game hard. Like, I feel like that in the same ways that he's looking for like growth, experience, connection, camaraderie. Like, I almost feel like that he would not be a type of player who would really backstab.
I think it's a great point. I'm glad you stopped me to make that point because I think it's more salient. And yeah, I think that's what it gets to. And even though I think he want to prove himself, I think he's trying to prove himself in the challenges.
Mhm.
And I think that he wouldn't want to be, he'd rather lose and uplift someone else than backstab them. I think
Mhm.
that, I think that that is just a trait. I think that I think he would like to be liked. That's my guess. More and do what he feels is the right thing, than necessarily be the winner at that expense. I think that's astute.
Yeah, and I wonder if maybe his path to victory might be like like trying to be like in the most honorable ways of not really deceiving the other players, but whether it was winning the challenges, playing the idols, making the fire at the final four. Like I wonder if maybe he might like most want like a path to victory like a Ben, or maybe a less extreme version of that of I wonder if it would be kind of like a Gabler.
Yeah, I was even thinking like a Tom Westman. If you
Mhm.
go back a little further, like where maybe, but yeah, I think that a Gabler might be something in the mold where these people are not known. Although Ben played like a double agent sort of thing, so he's probably the most crafty, I would say, in terms
Mhm.
of gameplay of that. Yeah, I think that that would be the closest mold that I would put Jeff in as a winner. Yeah, and I think that the thing for Jeff you have to watch out for is that I'm curious how he did in those challenges. I haven't seen him uh, do an actual challenge as part of like the Dree team. I mean, the guy's not the guy's not 20 years old anymore, but
Mhm.
he's incredibly fit. If you see him up close,
Yeah.
I think you've probably seen him more recently than I have, but I remember him being very fit.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, the guy definitely takes care of himself.
Yeah, for sure. So
Mhm. Okay. I have a question for you from BJ Luna, who says, "Have you ever played Dungeons and Dragons? If so, what class?"
I did play Dungeons and Dragons back in college. That's when I played
Okay.
Dungeons and Dragons. I feel that's what a lot of people play Dungeons and Dragons. It's a I had a my college roommate was the dungeon master, was the DM, and so I played my first I played two campaigns, two long campaigns that lasted like 2 years each.
Mhm.
I played a wizard, and I played a I played at I think the equivalent of a ranger. So I played back in the late 2000 in the mid to late 2000s, where I it was in Dungeons and Dragons rule set 3.5. Okay. And the thing that I got out of D&D Dungeons and Dragons, I liked the rules. I liked the rule set. It's, it's the same thing that I liked the Magic the Gathering. I bought
Yes.
the rule book, but I never bought the cards when I was a kid.
Mhm.
So I just read all the rules. I thought that was interesting to see how they interact. And it was the same, and thing about Dungeons and Dragons, it has these incredibly long and detailed rule sets, and these beautifully illustrated and expensive books that you can buy, and you can craft your character. And I was coming up with characters that I like. There are people that love to play Dungeons and Dragons because they love the role playing experience, and I understand that. That is honestly not what I get out of it. I kind of like being put in that video situation where it's a very open ended video game,
Mhm.
where it's like, okay, I'm now in this battle. How do I optimize my damage output to win this battle? And I literally wrote a calculator program that would spit out the optimal choice of attack pattern that would try to maximize the probability of damage I would apply. Like I was closer to like a game, what people call like a game lawyer. Like I'd be the person
Yes.
that was like, you can't do that. The initiative phase is already passed, and blah 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 blah. So they're sort of notoriously annoying. So that was sort of my role in the campaign.
Mhm. Um, would you play again now, or have you sort of been there, done that?
I play again. I think of the right group, I would certainly play again. Rob, have you ever played Dungeons and Dragons? Have you ever been involved in
I
this?
played certainly like some Dungeons and Dragons. Not very much. I think the thing that appeals to me the most about it is sort of like the improvisation.
Mm.
more so than like I find the like all the dice rolling to be a little monotonous of like, okay, this many hit points,
Mm.
okay, you know. But I feel like that when it's you're sort of like, okay, and that you're walking along and this happens and like asking questions and getting to be creative with it. I that's the thing I think that's really fun about it.
I think as more of an adult, that as a sort of more mature adult now, I would enjoy that stuff more than I used
Hmm.
to. I didn't appreciate the storytelling aspects of it, but some of the people who are great storytellers, they become the dungeon master and they know the improvise situations.
Hmm.
Um, I played another game that's similar, that's complicated. It was called BattleTech. It's a
Whoa.
BattleTech. This is basically giant. It is very on brand for me. Walking robots. Okay, so with missiles attached, and it would have a little hexagonal grid, and you move these mechs around, and you shoot at other mechs. There's no story, so it was more suited for me just trying to maximize the damage output. You would design your mech and like I'm going to put missile systems on the back, and I'm going to put jetpacks in here. And the rules of D&D were complicated. BattleTech is horrendous in a way I loved. I remember I took this game with me to I went to a sleepaway camp. Where it was like a science camp I went to one time, and I brought with me BattleTech, and I was gonna and I had my friends on the hall. I was gonna teach them BattleTech, and I remember we all made our mechs, and we got together, and I of course was the arbiter of all the rules. Like, okay, this is what you need to do. This is what you
Hmm.
need to do. We played for a few hours. We got through 2 turns. So we never finished a single game of
Hmm.
BattleTech. I actually have never in my life finished a game of BattleTech. Nowadays, if I wanted to, they could do it on the computer. They can automate everything, but it was horrendously complicated. Like imagine you shoot your laser at this mech,
Hmm.
and you hit there, and you're like, okay, you roll. Do you hit? Okay, all right. Don't forget to add all the modifiers for whether you had moved this round and how many moves the other person had made during this round, the target. That's how much they can evade. Do you hit? Okay. All right. Did you hit? Yes. All right. Where did you hit? You got to roll another dice. Okay. You hit the upper right torso. Well, that's where the missile launcher is. Okay. Roll there. You hit a critical hit. Okay. Go. What is mounted on the right shoulder of the mech?
Yeah.
Okay. The missile launcher is you can detonate the ammunition and cause the mech to explode via
Oh
the
my
right series
god.
of dice roll. It is wild. And then at which point does your pilot eject in time? And there are dice rolls for that. It's completely crazy. But I kind of loved it, even though I never finished a single game.
Okay. Speaking of mechs, okay. Mike wants to know how close are we to making robotic legs for people that are paralyzed?
So, robotic legs for people that are paralyzed. That is actually much closer to my area of specialization because I do robotic legs.
Yeah, can I just add that I feel like I did not know very much about prosthetic legs, and I feel like that Noelle being on this season of Survivor, I feel like that while I am certainly not an expert, I feel like
Yeah.
okay, I think I understand a little bit of like the mechanism that at least her prosthetic legs were used to attach and the different types of legs that she had.
Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah, I was so happy she was on the show for a number of reasons, and one of which was you learn something about people with transfemoral amputations and
Mhm.
transfemoral prostheses. So just to talk about some of the terminology here, okay? Because it depends. Like 'cause there are different technologies to assist people with different types of injuries. Okay. There are people who have prosthetic legs, and there are two major types. Okay, one is a transtibial, meaning that they have cut off at the tibia, so which means that that they still have their knee, like they
Mhm.
still have a knee that they can swing. So they will have a transtibial prosthesis, which might have an ankle joint, or it might just be kind of this curved piece of metal or carbon fiber if it's like a runner. Where so and so that and those are passive. We would say they're passive because they don't have motors, they don't have batteries that need to power them. So of course, someone like Noel is going to take a passive exoskeleton, a passive prosthesis on Survivor. Okay. There is in terms of other lower limb prostheses to replace a leg, there's the transfemoral. That's when you also need a knee, a mechanical knee attached. And so that's what Noelle had. She does transfemoral prosthesis. And clearly she has learned very effectively to kick her leg around in such a way that it swings her artificial tibia forward and into a gait, right? But that means she's doing extra effort with her hip to swing it forward to make it do that motion. Okay, the engineers have done a good job to try to make that as easy as possible, but fundamentally, she has to contribute energy to make that move, right? And she does, she did incredibly well. What a wonderful presence on that season. So how could you then motorize them? The answer is absolutely yes. Those as far as I can tell, I'm not aware of any products that are on the market, but when I go to conferences, I know several people who run laboratories where they make their own prototypes of these things. And so there's a couple things that are tricky about it, that they have interesting solutions. One of which is, if you have a motor on the knee, let's just talk about the transfemoral prosthesis, the one that has a robotic knee. Okay. Let's say you put a motor on the knee to swing for you. That sounds like a great idea. So that way Noelle or whoever needs transfemoral prosthesis have to swing it with their hip to kind of give it enough of a swing to do that. Have a motor on there. How does the motor know when to swing? And what if you want to back up? How does it know to swing back? Okay. So if you are early in your step, maybe you are just lifting up the leg to swing it forward, we would say that's very early in the gait cycle. Okay. And when it has swung forward and gotten all the way to touching the ground, we would say that's very late in the gait cycle. Okay. So, and how early or late in that gait cycle, we have a word for it. We call it phase. So what phase are you in the cycle? Are you early or late? And so so people are designing sensors and algorithms to detect, based upon using accelerometers and other sensors and such, whether you're early or late in the gait cycle. So Rob, are you familiar with what an accelerometer is? Is it something new that you've heard of?
Is it what tells me how fast I'm going in my car?
The accelerator makes you go fast. Okay. Yeah. But I will say you almost certainly have an accelerometer if you have a modern phone. Okay.
Okay.
The accelerometer measures acceleration. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's the thing that tells you whether the acceleration of gravity is in this direction or in this direction. For podcast listener, it tells you whether or not your phone should be in portrait or landscape mode, because it's sensing the acceleration due to gravity. But it can sense all kinds of accelerations. If you tossed your phone in the air, it would sense that is in free fall. Okay. In fact, there are back when computer hard drives were not solid state, there would be safety mechanisms in laptops and such that would sense if you're in free fall and shut down the hard drive, so that way when your laptop hit the ground, the hard drive wouldn't be spinning, or they would try to fix it so that kind of stuff wouldn't happen. So they're really cheap, they're really small, and you can use to sense the acceleration you could attach it to someone's hip, and you can sense it if they're accelerating their hip, if they're trying to swing it, and so you could use that information to know for the robot to know whether it needs to swing its leg forward or backward. So if you look at some of the research videos that people will put out of these prostheses that they've made, they'll show examples a lot of time of the person leaning forward and then the leg automatically swinging forward. Then they lean back and then the leg automatically swings back because it's detecting the phase of the gait cycle. So that's one of the challenges. That's actually in the last 5 years, they made 5-10 years, made a lot of progress on.
Mm-hmm.
So I will point out that, so the question is also about exoskeletons for people who are paralyzed as well, right? Is that correct? If I look at the question.
I don't know. Did they get that far? That just about robotic legs for people that are paralyzed.
For paralyzed. So yeah. So we're talking about people who have amputations. If you're paralyzed, you still have You're physically, your legs are there, but but they can't move, right? And there are products on the market right now where basically you strap into them like they're like a little, like we call them exoskeletons, okay?
Hmm.
But they're not talking Tony Stark exactly. We're talking about, basically sticks that are strapped to your body that are connected by motors.
Hmm.
And there's devices. There's like one called the Rewalk. It's been on the market for a long time. I think they're on version 6. And this is just one product of several competing products where basically they give you crutches and you put out crutches in front of you, and then you move them forward in front of you, and that indicates to the legs whether or not they should walk you forward or not. So those products actually exist. In terms of how ubiquitous they are, actually, I don't know much about how much they proliferated the market, but that technology exists. Where the researchers that I see are trying to push things is they're trying to make they're trying to make the devices more lightweight, more energy efficient, more reliable, and also this is a cool one, being able to sense your intent. Okay, we call that
Okay.
sort of like intent recognition. And so, like we talked about with gait phase, we can sort of tell when you want to lean forward or lean back, and the foot kind of moves or doesn't move, right? How do you know if you like, hey, I'm about to walk upstairs? How does the prosthetic know that? Do you give it cameras? Okay, or sometimes there are subtle things you might do with your hip that indicate that, oh, I'm not just want to swing my leg forward to walk. I'm swinging my leg up because I want to go up a stair. So I talk all the time with laboratories who take a bunch of data from real people and they put it through machine learning algorithms. We're talking about in order to have ways of detecting, is this person trying to walk or is this person trying to go up a stair? So this is a
Hmm.
very real application, like right now in research labs that people are working on to make robotic prostheses and exoskeletons better products for people who need them.
Hmm. Okay, Christian. Apparently, I asked you, or at
Oh,
least a Rob Cesternino catfish asked you, do you have a Reuben sandwich origin story? Of course, your famous favorite sandwich.
absolutely. So I mean, in terms of the origin story of the Reuben sandwich, I'm not sure exactly how I got the idea I like them, but I remember in college one time I'd heard of one and I saw that it had like its Thousand Island dressing on corned beef. I'm like, oh, that's I'll try it. And it was like on like pumpernickel or something. And it was like and it was nicely toasted, and it was good. I enjoyed it, and I never kind of experienced like a different kind of sandwich than like a that I would remember, like other like peanut butter jelly or like I love
Hmm.
burgers, those kinds of things. Um, but I think that one of the reasons that I really love sandwiches a lot, I remember one time I had just graduated from college, and Emma and I had already been dating by that point, and she actually spent a year. She moved to Japan for a year to teach English to Japanese schools. And so we were long distance for a year while I started graduate school. And one winter break, she flew back to the United States to her family, who was then living in Oregon, in Hood River, Oregon, up on Mount Hood. And I had never really been to Oregon at that point. It was before I went there for grad school, and so I went out and visited her there for like New Year's. And at the time, we were staying at kind of like a cabin type place near Hood River. And Hood River and Oregon in general has a lot of great breweries, little craft breweries, like Full Sail Brewery is up there. I had never been to like a brewery before. It's not something I've been to. But like we were there for like a week, and I remember every day, every meal, we would go to a different like brewery. I would get a different sandwich and like a taster tray. And and it was just so relaxing, and it was so escapist for me just to be in this very cool weather in beautiful Hood River, Oregon, near Mount Hood, and just eating sandwiches and drinking beers and going back to the cabin and lighting a fire and watching America's Next Top Model.
It sounds very
That's
good. That
it was
sounds,
it was
yeah.
it was it was a great vacation. And I think that maybe part of my like, I mean, I need to have a larger repertoire of sandwiches. That's got to be probably a good push for
Mhm.
2023, a good goal for me. Try some really exotic sandwiches. Like I still have to come up with a better Mount Rushmore of sandwiches for you than the last one I came up with you on the last Dr. Hubicki. But I think that, but part of the reason I just like enjoy like the Reuben, like I remember I would like a Reuben sandwich and other sandwiches and just a taste of trait. And it was just so relaxing. So I do have that nostalgia for that feeling. It's probably one of the reasons why I refer to sandwiches in my mind with such reverence.
You have here on the list a question from yourself.
Yes.
Can I ask you about that?
Yes, you can. So, dear audience, I have to say, you ask a lot of really great questions. And I hope I try to get to as many as I can. And I was wondering, Rob, it's okay if I sort of just filibuster on a topic that I can't imagine anyone would ever ask about.
Great.
All right. Okay. All right. Because man, I sometimes I just like I come across a thing and it just reminds me. There's a topic that I was like, you know what, this might be fun to talk about. Maybe it's ridiculous and be stupid, but here's the topic. Okay, I listen to this Christian's mystery filibuster. Is what I have here. Okay. All right. So, Rob, have you ever heard of speed runs in
Speed
video games?
runs.
In
No.
video games. So in
I just
video
how
gaming,
fast can you beat the game? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's exactly. It's pretty. Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. But speed running in video games. Okay. Now, I am not a speed runner myself. But I do have, and have had for a long time, an odd fascination with it. That with the culture that you can see on the internet of speed running. It is
Okay.
hysterical, and I love it, and for many reasons. And that people will go to. So if those who don't know, there's a culture of people who game on the internet, play video games, and people will take classic video games of all kinds, or even modern video games, and try to beat them as fast as possible. And if you've not heard of this subculture, the lengths and extremes that people will go to get faster times would boggle the mind. Like people have dedicated almost their entire like free time of lives to finding ways to shave off fractions of a second, sometimes a single frame of time off video games. And they go back to and the fun part is a lot of times it's classic video games that if you played games as a kid, you might remember. And you can watch these on YouTube, people live stream it on Twitch, them trying to beat these times, and you would be amazed at ways they find to save time. Okay, and there are so many games and so many categories of speedrunning. Probably one of the more popular ones, or the classic ones, is the original Super Mario Brothers, which is now beaten, I think it's sub 5 minutes now. And
Mhm.
that game has been analyzed frame by frame. People have built software tools to discover new ways to shave off just a single frame of information. And it's almost like a scientific exercise people have gone through. It goes all the way up to modern games, like the most recent Zelda game or whatever game just came out. I guarantee you, there is a speedrunner on the internet that is making it their life's work to get the fastest time. And I want to talk today about a very particular kind of speed run, or a challenge run, because people come up with different kinds of speed runs. There's ones where they will try to beat the game as fast as possible. They call it any percent speed run. It doesn't matter what percentage of the game you complete, do it as fast as you can. Those are the fastest times. There are 100% speed runs where you have to do everything in the game as fast as you can, which is hilarious. Emily and I would watch Zelda Breath of the Wild 100% speed runs.
Wow. This is
That
relationship goals. Right.
yeah. I gotta say, I got it pretty good. So and those take 20 hours to do. So some guy at a computer at his Nintendo Switch for 20 hours doing this run, and so it's crazy like that. There are people who do low percent, meaning can you beat the game as fast as possible without actually accomplishing anything, which is weird. So strange categories.
Mhm.
The one I want to talk today is about something that are restriction challenges. There
Okay.
is so there's a Super Mario Brothers for the Nintendo 64 called Super Mario 64. It's a very beloved game that I actually never played very much. And it was the first 3D game where you're Mario jumping around.
I am familiar. Yeah.
Okay, you know this. For your audience who doesn't know, right? So that's a very popular speedrun category. But there's also a subcategory where you try to beat the game without jumping, by jumping as few times as possible.
Okay.
By how you literally count the number of times you press the A button, which is the jump button. Okay. So it's called the A button challenge. And it's hard for me to describe, it's hard for me to tell you how ridiculous it is. So I'm going to try to explain to you the degrees to which people will go to not press the A button. Okay. So if you want just the full experience, there's a great video that goes over some of this. There's a 5-hour tutorial if you want to watch it on YouTube. I haven't watched that one yet. I was getting into watching these right before I went on Survivor. So I had the Mario 64 music in my head on David Beach. I was worried I would whistle it and they would vote me off. But there's a video called Watch for Rolling Rocks in 0.5 A presses, 1/2 of an A press. It's got multiple millions of views and was very popular in 2017. Watch that video if you don't believe me. So in order to not press the A button, these are the tricks that they are included but not limited to. They will find ways to slowly trick one of the enemies to jump in the air just a little bit, then leave the area, which will freeze it in place by unloading it in the game's memory, and then come back into the room. It jumps again, but it's still in the air. Freeze it in place by leaving their area, basically causing it to jump a little bit by little bit by little bit up into the air until it's super high in the air. So that way, at some point later, they're up on a higher level. And instead of having to jump, they will just fall off the ledge, bounce off the enemy, and get to the other ledge. This is a process that might take 30 minutes to do. Okay. There are some times where there is a platform that is up higher, and you might have to jump, or you might have to jump over an obstacle to get to. They found a way to get past that obstacle by teleporting themselves to what they call a parallel universe within the game that only exists because the game's code that puts you on the map, it has a number in the game's code that puts you on the map. And when it's checking for whether or not it hits an obstacle, it uses a different form of mathematical rounding. And as a result, if you manage to trick the game to trick the game in a certain way, it will teleport you to a version of the world that's basically an ocean away, but it's a parallel universe. And then you can teleport back on the other side of the obstacle. And in order to do this, you have to run Mario into a wall, build up this invisible value that you don't see called speed for 20 hours. And then it will get you past this one obstacle. Okay. And in order to do this, they have mapped out an elaborate series of maneuvers they have to do in the parallel universe, which they cannot see because it does not show you in the parallel universe. So they have to do this macro and blind.
Right.
So,
and if these people had been working on Fusion, we would have had it 40 years ago.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's in a way, and there are whole YouTube channels that chronicle, and the process by which they get this is actually mirrors the scientific process, where they didn't just have this trick. They had to do basic scientific research on how the game works before they discovered that there might be a trick kind of like this. You know, they will do a completely different trick and for a completely different reason and realize it has applications where they never saw it before. Now, this is all to prevent them from hitting the A button one time in a video game made over 20 years ago. But the point remains, like, so like it's kind of the scientific process of discovery and application. So if you want to have your mind blown, I would recommend checking out that video. I could go on longer. I'll end the filibuster there, but I want to make you aware of the A button challenge.
Have you ever attempted a speed run?
Not seriously. I've done some casual speed running, not competitive speed running. It can get pretty. It's not as intense as professional esports, like what Kenny Huang would do, or like Mari Takahashi would do.
Right.
But it is pretty intense. and for people who are ready to dedicate a lot of time to it. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And just for, yeah, go on.
I feel like I've seen my kids watching, okay, we're doing Super Mario Odyssey and we're not gonna get one coin.
Yeah. It's kind of like that. Imagine you took it really seriously.
Yeah.
And so like, and this one particular guy, I think, who's most famous for these A button challenges, he's managed, and his goal is to collect every star, every big star in Mario 64.
Hmm.
And he's gotten it down to all 120 stars in 14 A presses. And the tricks he's done are just, they are mind boggling, and they require like 20-minute video explainers, every one of them. So it's incredible. I both in awe, but I also appreciate the dedication that someone has to a self-imposed challenge. So I love it, and I wanted to talk about that today.
Okay. Christian, is there anything else from your list that you want to make sure we hit tonight?
So I see we got I got a sneak question in from Haley Leak, who's, I believe,
Yes.
from Australian Survivor,
Okay.
Brains and Brawn, if I recall.
Okay.
I believe and yeah,
Yes.
she's an academic, and I think she wanted to ask this question.
Okay. Do you think your research career has been in any way affected by playing Survivor for the positive?
So,
Of course, right?
yes, absolutely, it has. Absolutely, it has. And it has brought. I mean, not only is it fun to get like recognized at conferences for complete enough to read for both your
Hmm.
research and also the guy on TV. That's fun. Like, it's funny. It's fun being at the dinner table at a conference, and everyone else is talking business, and you're talking business, and then all of a sudden you hear the whisper of the word survivor, and you realize,
Hmm.
you're like, okay, suddenly stories are going to have to come out now. I'm going to have to explain what it is, and it's kind of exciting. But also, you meet a lot of people who you would never meet before. There might be like, I've got to talk with Jatia, which Tia Hart, about how to do science outreach to underrepresented communities. Like, I wouldn't necessarily have met Jatia otherwise. Like, I have to meet like some really cool people, and not even just research related, just people with different perspectives on life, and that doesn't just help your research. I just think helps you make you a more well-rounded person. So I mean, it's definitely helped in a big way.
Hmm. Think of all the podcasts we've gotten to do.
Yeah, clearly, and this is such. I was talking to you before we got on here today, Rob, that it's this is a busy time for me, but it's a
Hmm.
joy to, like, what, by taking the time to talk with Rob. One, I get to talk science and a button challenge speedrunners,
Sure.
which is fun, but I get to take a break out of my day to talk to someone I like to talk to, and to talk and listen to questions that are interesting.
Yeah.
So, like, another vector that would have been implausible otherwise.
And I feel like that the audience leading up to this one, I saw some very nice comments from people who were really excited that you were going to come back and to do this. And so it's just really, really nice to see that, it's very fun for me to be here on this side of the microphone. But I'm just very happy that so many people in the audience seem to appreciate the time that you put into this. You take this very seriously. I know that this has been a thing where you don't like to come on here and just give like a flip answer, because people cite your answers in research papers.
Yeah, that was a fun thing. I'd like to find out, and I also want to echo. Thank you all, by the way, for listening to this. I really I don't tell you enough how much I appreciate that you want to listen, and that makes me want to really put in effort to make sure I give you the best and answers that I can, and the most honest takes that I can, and hopefully, and that you'll learn something you might not have known before. So I thank you all so much, and thank you, Rob. This whole Ask Dr. Hubicki, that was like your idea. I thought that was a great one.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I think that was a little bit born out of like it was during like the darkest times of like the Survivor layoff of that we were probably like 6 months away from Survivor having been on the air and
Mhm.
probably 8 months away from it coming back, and I don't know exactly what the other divine motivation was other than like, hey, this sounds like a fun idea.
Yeah, and so I'm very thankful that through serendipity and whatever circumstances that we've had this. So thank you so much, Rob.
I saw a question in the chat earlier that wanted to know, had you watched The Traitors yet? I know
I
you watched The Mole, had a lot of thoughts about The Mole once you finally got to it.
Yes. Yeah, I have not seen The Trader, sadly. I mean, if for those who haven't listen, I
Yes.
have many mole takes. I crammed many. My medium dives. I make a lot of my out of my 1 hour medium dive. Let me tell you,
Hmm.
if you want to take a look at that. But yeah, I'm assuming the format. I mean, have you watched it? Is it? Have you
Yes.
seen it almost?
Not
Okay,
only did I watch it, I did like basically a marathon podcast coverage of it that we
oh,
basically Puya and we watched every episode and then came on and did a podcast over the course of 2 days last week.
so am I reading it correctly that like Stephanie LaGrossa and like Siri Fields are they're now like the reality show darlings of the new NBC cinematic reality universe is the
Yeah,
way I kind of read it.
they're big stars there, and Rachel
Yeah.
Riley as well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, yeah, the ones that the Survivor ones that ones I know, but so it's like it's mole-esque, which I love the mole
Mhm.
format. So I can
It's
see so
Mafia. That's basically what the game is.
oh, oh, great. That would be fun. So it actually is the goal. So you have to eliminate the mafia,
Yeah, the
like by avoiding
Mafia
out.
the Mafia at nighttime does a kill, and the
Got
people
it.
who are not the Mafia do a banishment, and then
Oh,
they're looking to banish the people that are the traitors.
I can't imagine. I don't remember ever seeing a reality show mafia before. I
Yeah.
know that people have done live mafia games, but
Yeah,
this
it's
is
really well
produced
done.
one.
I'm
Yeah.
interested to get your reaction to it. So whenever
Yeah.
you and Emily get to it, please send me a text and let me know how you're thinking about it.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
Yes. Okay. Just a nice comment. This is from RW. Christian has to be one of the most likable and entertaining humans to ever grace our screen. Grateful for his relationship with RHAP.
Oh, well, that's thank you, RW. That's great. I mean, and I really that's wonderful to hear. And it's also I will say it's also really I love that people are willing, and every time I hear that people remember a thing that I said from a previous podcast, I am immensely flattered. Like I was just like, oh, I'm glad you remember that. Like that's I'm a little so I do appreciate it. I just want to reiterate that. Thank you.
Okay. Christian, what's coming up for you?
Oh, well, for me, the semester is upon
Yes.
me.
Okay.
The new winter semester. Um, but like it's so I'm getting settled into that. I look forward to summer
Hmm.
at this point. I mean, but I'll tell you, it was one thing I got to do last year. I thought was fun, and I hope to. It'd be cool to take another nice vacation. Last time I went to Alaska. Finally, after all this time, went to go to Alaska. Partly, I think you kind of prompted the idea in my brain
Oh, I
at one
did?
point.
How?
Yeah, I think maybe indirectly. I remember like in our, I think it might have been Ask Dr. Hubicki 4 because the timing would have been right because it would have been right after Survivor 42. We were talking about like I don't know, but go on visits to places. I said it's like maybe Alaska or something, and then
Yeah.
after that we actually planned a trip to Alaska. So
Yeah.
like so that was I'm glad we like yeah.
Okay. Maybe you'll do the A button challenge next.
That's right. I'll go visit that guy's house, and I was like,
Mhm.
we'll watch him run into a wall for 20 hours, and just be just fixated by it.
Maybe you'll
I think
cross
that would
the
push the
ocean
limits of the
and visit a
relationship.
parallel dimension. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's yeah, I think that would push the limits of our relationship, though. I'll be
Yeah.
perfectly honest.
Okay. Maybe you'll go back to the cabin for sandwiches and a cold beer.
Yeah, not a bad one. Not a bad one
Yeah.
at all.
Okay. All right. Well, Christian, again, thank you for making this time to do this. I know how incredibly busy you are, but it is so wonderful that you take a night out of your schedule to do this.
My pleasure. And I wish you all the best in the upcoming podcasting season and the upcoming season Survivor, March 2,
Yeah, so
March
we
1.
should, I mean, like we're creeping up for, I feel like we're going to start to meet our new Survivor 44 friends. Hope they're not, jerks and mean people, because they're like part of my life forever. So hoping that they're all like wonderful, fun game players.
You should be on the casting like decision because like it's like, look, I'm a stakeholder here.
I'm
You know, I
stuck with
have to
these
deal with
people
these.
forever. I mean, they Survivor moves on to the next cast. That it's like, oh, like 18 new people. You're gonna know them forever.
Yeah, it's like, let me go back to your Twitter feed here, your Instagram feed, where it's like, it looks like you were mad at someone who criticized you. It looks like this could be a problem if you're going to be listening to Steven on the Know-It-Alls. Okay, all right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Fit.
I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure
It'll be
never any problems. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for joining us here for this conversation. Of course, plenty of other stuff going on here on RHAP, including we just dropped an interview with Owen Knight on Wednesday. That is up in addition to everything else that we have going on. We closed out our circle coverage on Wednesday. And so check that out and more up at robhasawebsite.com. Christian, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for listening. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Bye.